contingency plans are being taken into account. So you should have that as part of your BSA program. Independent testing, we just talked about. This is just another way of looking at these pillars, and also of that designated person for the BSA position that will be responsible for managing all BSA transactions, and also ongoing training for board of directors and employee. That's in line with their position. And then the fifth pillar now under the beneficial ownership rules and customer due diligence is another one of those. So those are the 5 pillars that we've talked about. There is an expectation or an understanding that an effective BSA program must encompass all of those 5 pillars, and there will be appropriate testing in each of those pillars. So things have shifted a little bit in BSA because there's been an update to the manual that came up in April of this year. And we're going to talk about those things and how things may have shifted, but there's nothing new that's in the manual per se. It's just that more so how they're looking at it has just been distributed a little bit differently. But what they're saying now is that significant weaknesses, if significant weaknesses or violations are detected in any of those pillars, you will have a violation of a pillar. So you could be provided, your examiner may recommend certain specific correction actions, or could also provide you or give you a civil money penalty or any other kind of penalty. So you got to be watching out for those types of things. All right, so some interagency guidance that just came out in April. Regarding COVID, everything that's going on with COVID. In April, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network provided us this guidance on the coronavirus and how to deal with our BSA functions and all that kind of stuff. So take a look at that. It's in your document, but the links are on FinCEN, and I can provide those to you if they don't work through your PDF. But basically, what they're saying is we understand that there may be some delays in filing some of the reports, but other than CTRs, yeah, there isn't a grace period for anything else. The new normal doesn't mean anything here, and our BSA requirements are still required to be dealt with, or we do need to comply. So there's really no relief from BSA. All right, so with that said, how did we do, right? How did we all do? And I wouldn't imagine that it was an easy process for us to figure out, but how did we meet all our obligations under Bank Secrecy? We received tons of guidance. We received interagency explanations about all sorts of things, exam priorities, and then we also received an exam manual, like if we didn't need anything else, but update. This exam manual update actually took 6 years to complete, so I'm glad that it's here. But you'll find that when we go through that there really isn't anything different about the guidance, except for just a little bit more emphasis on how examiners are just being transparent. But we received all sorts of agency guidance, and you'll see them on the screen right now. But and if we don't talk about them here, it's available on FinCEN, it's available on CFPB, and the links are at the end of the presentation anyway. So some changes from the exam manual. Basically, what they've done is just divided and siloed everything, and they want you to take a look at your program in the same manner. So, you know, there's been changes to the risk assessment, internal controls, independent testing, and training. So let's start off with one of the most important things, I think, of the pillars, because of the 5, what we're here for is to make sure that you as a BSA officer have what you need. So I'm going to let Shane in, and I'm going to give her control of the screen. So give me 2 seconds, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about, yes, thank you, Shannon. She had to request my control. I'll give you control. So she's going to talk to you about the BSA officer expectations.
So thank you, Judy. As Judy was saying, there was an update to the exam manual. And in that update, it did stress the BSA officer role and the qualifications for that role. So included, and we're going to discuss today, is that BSA officer does need to be designated by the board of directors. The individual does need to be qualified, meaning they do have to have knowledge of the BSA rules and regulations. They do need to coordinate monitoring day-to-day compliance because the BSA officer is responsible for that compliance program. Competent, independent, and has appropriate authority, right? So we're going to go into that in a little more depth, but you need to be able to understand the rules and regulations and be able to push that down the road and make sure that they're being followed appropriately. You do need to have access to suitable resources, right? Because there are a lot of responsibilities and things that you do need to be looking out for. So you need to make sure you have the right access to be able to do your job appropriately. Your role and responsibility as a BSA officer, which we all know can be a little overwhelming at times, but you are responsible for a bit, and you guys all do a great job, right? We want to make sure that not only is our institution safe, but our members are safe as well. So the BSA compliance officer is responsible for coordinating, monitoring. They're charged with managing all aspects of the compliance program, as I said. The board of directors must not only designate a qualified individual, but you need to make sure that you're documenting this in your board minutes. Okay, we have noticed that the NCUA and have been looking out for that, and they are making sure that that is documented.
And just really one quick, because I will do this, I'll interject and we're going to go back and forth. They're asking you to do this annually. All right, annually. They want to see the conversation happening annually. It's not that it's just one time and forget and done, you know, that Judy's the BSA officer forever. Where is it in 2020 that Judy was specifically named? And where's her backup?
Yes, you need to make sure that you have that conversation with your board. I know if a few of you have been there for years and years and years, you do need to make sure that that is brought up on an annual basis. The board of directors is responsible for ensuring that you as a BSA compliance officer have adequate authority, independence, and access to resources to be able to do your job appropriately. So you are responsible also for the policies and procedures and implementing them, right? Because you want to make sure that you are following the rules and regulations. You want to make sure, and you do have the authority to delegate, right? So a few of us with the larger credit unions, you may have a few people in your compliance program. So you can oversee your staff, but you need to make sure that they are doing their job appropriately. And as I said, you want to make sure you have knowledge of the BSA related regulations and are able to implement them appropriately. And that goes with the training, which we're going to talk about in a little bit as well. So the BSA compliance officer is required to report to the board directly as far as ongoing compliance with the BSA program, so that way the board can make informed decisions about risk exposure, right? And we're going to go into you know, the risks and our risk assessment and things along to be able to protect your credit union. So the board of directors won't be able to make appropriate decisions if they're not appropriately informed. So we need to make sure that we're having those conversations. Reporting to the board of directors or the committee itself about the status of ongoing compliance must include BSA related information, which is including SAR activity. So whether you do it on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, the NCUA is looking to make sure that you are reporting that SAR information to the board. And it can be a high level overview, you know, just a brief description of maybe it's the COVID related scams or structuring. You don't need to supply all the information, but they do need that overview.
And just really quickly, one thing that I did see come out of one of my trainings for board of directors, where some of our board of directors, just as a side note, are older people, and they get hung up on some of the language that you might provide them as far as what their responsibilities are, because they want to make sure they're doing a good job. So when you say that that you're expected to review SAR information, watch out, because they're just like, you know, it says I have to look at it. What give it to me? You know, no, it's more so that SAR information or SARs need to be, you have to notify your board that a SAR has been filed. Yes, they are privy to all that information, but they don't need to know it unless, of course, there's a need to know it. Right. So we want to make sure that we communicate that to our board, because it's always sad trying to pull them out of, wait, no, you don't need to. And it's just too much there. So just All right, go ahead.
Yes, we want to make sure we keep our board happy and in compliant, but we don't want to end up giving you more work than maybe need be, right?
Right.
The appropriate information does need to go. For the exam update, specific comments in the update section of the BSA officer included: the BSA officer should be competent as demonstrated by the knowledge of BSA and related regulations, implementation of the BSA AML compliance program, and understanding of the bank's money laundering and terrorist financing and other illicit financial activity in the risk profile associated with banking activities. So this is kind of why we're going into a little more depth about your training, because you do need to, we have seen in the past, you know, credit unions where someone goes on vacation and they come back and all of a sudden they're the BSA board officer, and they're not quite sure what their role is. So we need to make sure that we have an understanding of what it is that a BSA officer does and how to appropriately execute that job position.
Yeah, because really quickly, you know, how many of us, I mean, BSA officers are in this position, really applied for that job, quite frankly. Yeah, many of us have this BSA function as a side job or as a side position, right? Or we were just there by default. I know I got into compliance by default. Nobody else could do it, so I just kind of got there, right? So this is why we want to make sure that we are stressing the importance of the BSA officers' qualifications. This is where we see the exam manual really pushing. It's the qualifications of the role of the BSA officer.
Right. And we want to make sure that, so an indicator of appropriate authority would be having your BSA compliance officer's input when you're rolling out a new product or service, right? Because you want to make sure that that product and service is aligned with rules and regulations. You know, we know that credit unions are now, with the whole COVID-19, we're looking more into going to the digital age, offering mobile deposits, online banking. The BSA officer needs to be a part of that implementation to make sure that you are watching for that money laundering, fraud type transactions. Another indicator of appropriate independence is clear lines of reporting, communication to the board of directors that does not compromise the BSA compliance officer's independence, right? So you can have those conversations with the board. You feel as if this needs to be improved or this is doing very well, but you need to make sure you stand your ground. If you need assistance in an area or you need some sort of maybe electronic monitoring tool, then you need to express that and have that conversation with your board to let them know that in order to be compliant and be able to do your job properly, you do need the right tools in order to get that completed. And you need to be able to have access to those resources, right? So if for some reason, you know, you're looking into an anti-money laundering system, but haven't quite found one yet, maybe you need some assistance. Maybe you need someone to help come in and jump in and help review some of your reports to see if you're filing a SAR, so that way those SARs come in on time. Make sure that you have access to those resources. These are, and so, you know, this is something that I'm sure most of us have is skill sets, right? You wouldn't be in your position if you didn't have those skill sets. You just want to make sure that you're playing off of those skill sets, right? You're in a management role. Make sure that you have the motivation to be able to direct people. Monitoring, right? If you may be monitoring yourself, making sure you're getting those reports in on time, or monitoring others and making sure they are doing their job efficiently. Learning strategies, time management. We all know there's not enough time in the day to get everything done, especially in the BSA officer role, right? So we need to prioritize. We need to make sure that we, you know, are doing the timing, having our timing reports in first, and then following up on any other items. The compliance culture and anti-money laundering compliance is not just one person's job, right? It's everyone's job. It's not just the BSA officer in the compliance department, it's the teller, it's you know, your lender. Your board actually needs to be trained because they need to be able to make the appropriate risk categories and risk assessments to make the right decisions. I'm sorry, my screen kind of froze here for a moment. Judy, my screen is frozen, so I don't know if you want to jump in here so we keep moving.
Okay, sure. So one of the things that came out of 2020, obviously, is that creating a culture of compliance by the BSA officer, actually, this is a function that you would have and staff higher or executive management or anyone in management, really. It's important that we create this culture of compliance from up, down, or you know, however you want to look at it. But if we don't get buy-in from our board of directors and then from management, then we don't have a good, compliant, and comprehensive BSA program. So some of the things that the guidance that's coming out of FinCEN, you know, somebody should put themselves on mute. You know, even though this guidance is old, it's very, very much in play now. It's critical that our board of directors and leadership understand that we are all committed to BSA. There's something going on. Is there an echo?
Yeah, I think we're having a little bit of technical issues here.
With you. Anyway, we want to make sure that our leadership is engaged, that that compliance in a sense is not compromised by revenue interests, that information is shared throughout our organization, that we have adequate human and technical resources, right? We need enough staff, we need IT, we need certain things to do our jobs. You guys do so much in this whole realm that you need to make sure that you're speaking up if you're not getting it, because this is the whole role of the BSA officers, to ensure that everything is in its place. And if it's not, please make sure you document. If you say, I need a monitoring system because I can't do this all by myself, well, don't just verbally do it. Make sure that you put that in an email and send it off, because again, there are, not again, I keep saying that word, I don't know why I do that. There have been many civil penalties, civil money penalties that are directly imposed on individual BSA officers. Take your role very seriously, understand that it's up to you to make sure that things happen. And if there isn't, then just cover your butt, okay? How's your screen now, Shannon?
I think it's working now. It stopped flashing, so that's great.
Okay. So you just make sure that you all understand what you're all supposed to be doing. We talked about all of these things. You could probably just skip this one anyway. But make sure that one of the things that I did do, you can go back really quickly to that screen if you don't mind. There's a lot of conversation that's coming on and a lot of penalties that I'm seeing for failure to devote enough staff to proper BSA compliance, because they lead to systemic failures. There's a lot of information that's being shared that from our examiners, and they're just not having it. You know, there's no reason you should not have enough staff. There's no reason you should not be looking at your reports. And so make sure that you have what you need as an officer. All right, go ahead, Shannon, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's quite all right. Thank you. The board of directors and volunteers role. As we know, some of them are kind of there to be there, and some of them really want to get involved and really want to know hands-on work, right? So let's go down. They're not required to be involved with the day-to-day nitty-gritty, but they just need an overview, right? They need to be able to understand how the compliance program works and what it's there for. The board is required to review the credit union's risk assessment to include an OFAC risk assessment, and we're going to go into OFAC a little bit more detail coming along. The board must review and approve the BSA and OFAC policies in writing, right? And that does need to be documented in your board minutes. We have seen the examinators looking for those. They do need to approve your AML, CIP, and OFAC policies as well. The board is responsible for providing oversight. And it can be delegated to an audit or a supervisory committee, depending on how large your institution is, as long as they have an understanding of the overall. The board should expect compliance updates, right, on the ongoing state of compliance, the training status of employees, reports of examination and follow-up. That's actually very important, right? We see the examinators coming in. They want to make sure that your board is aware of what's going on, if there are any findings or recommendations, and they want to make sure that the board is aware of any follow-up opportunities. So if you did find a recommendation and they suggested something, make sure you keep your board updated as to how you're going to execute that, right? We have this in place. We want a target date. We want to have it by this date, and we expect it to be completed by this date. And then on that date, make sure you're reporting to them what the status is. Okay, so they are looking for that trail. The board, as I said, should be reviewing the suspicious activity reports and receive assurance that identifies that any issues have been resolved, right? Because you want to not keep them on edge. They need to be reassured that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. And the board must ensure that the staff is completing necessary and ongoing training at least annually, right? That is a requirement. So we need to make sure that's completed as well.
And then just really quickly, how does your examiner know all this stuff, right? Your examiner is going to look through your board minutes. They're going to look through all your board minutes at the time of the exam to see that you did have these conversations, that the results of the audit were explained to the board of directors, that, you know, everything, that's where they'll look for it.
Mm-hmm. And the examiners will routinely talk to your board members.
Yes.
And if your board members are kind of staring there with a blank space, the examiners are going to get that impression that the board really doesn't know all that's going on, and that's going to be red flag, right? So that's going to make those examiners dig a little deeper and kind of see what's going on in there. So we want to make sure, again, that everyone is knowledgeable and has that understanding of what's going on in the credit union itself. Once an exam is completed, it's the board's duty to ensure that any corrective action is taken. So if there is that finding, it is the board's responsibility to make sure that it is completed. So as any employee of the credit union that has any type of hands-on with any type of BSA, OFAC, you know, in line with that, we do need to make sure that they do have the adequate training, right? So tellers are going to have a little more focus on the SIP training. Lending may have some more focus on, you know, money laundering through fraudulent loans, right? Fraudulent loan applications. So we want to make sure that each training program is aligned with the roles and responsibilities. Your employees should be aware that they need to document any potential risks, right? And provide that feedback to management. So if you have a manager who's working in a back office or right now working from home, they're not going to exactly know what's going on in the teller line. So if a teller does see something that is suspicious, they need to make sure they're communicating that to the right places. So we want to make sure that that communication is key. And we want to make sure that your front role is thinking compliance, right? We want to make sure that they're always thinking compliance in the back of their head. You know, are we doing the right thing? Is this what needs to be done?
Right, and just quickly, you know, as an employee, your role is really to look out for your credit union and to make sure that something that in the rollout of new services and products, or maybe a new geographic location or whatever that might be, that you are paying attention and that you are documenting anything that you see. You know, okay, well, yeah, here's RDC, you know, the remote deposit capture function went out, really great, we love it. But I'm noticing, you know, that some of these checks are going through without the checkbox off, you know, saying for remote deposit only. So you notice this, but nobody else does, right? So make sure that you document those types of things so that that can be given to those people that look at the risks and then implement the type of mitigating factor that has to be put in place to take care of whatever it was that you identified, that the risk that's associated with not clicking off that box. You know, maybe they're able to go deposit that check somewhere else now because that checkbox hasn't been put on. So those types of things are the risks that we as employees are able to see, and we need to communicate those things with that. All right, so I think I may have screen share now, right, Shannon?
I think so.
I may have control. All right. So I mentioned before that there's been some updates to the manual. I believe it was April 15th. It could have been a little, maybe the 16th. But the link to the updated manual is available there. And there's a lot of stuff that's going on. But what was interagency statement did come out regarding this update. What did come out with that press release was also some certainty for us to understand that this is not this new manual or the updates to the manual that haven't happened since 2014 should not be interpreted as new instructions or as new or increased focus. This manual update is really intended to give us transparency into what the examination process is, and also to give us opportunity to hold our examiners accountable, right? So this is what it says, and this is what we're expected to do. So let's get into some of the things, because a lot of the updates provide instructions to examiners on how to rate us using our risk assessments and how the importance of that comes into play. All right, so here is a screenshot of the manual updates. If you're interested, it's a 41-page update, and it's basically these are the areas that they dealt with this time around. They will do further updates to the manual as time goes on, but like I said, this particular one here, this 41-page document, took 6 years in the making. So everyone has to join in. You know, when it's an interagency change, you know, we have the OCC, we have NCUA, we have the FDIC, everyone's chiming in, and they all have to be speaking from the same place. So that's why it took so long. So hopefully we won't get another change until another 6 years. But let's dive into this a little bit. So here's the interagency statement that came out regarding in April of 2020 regarding the exam manual updates. So the agency has made revisions throughout the updated sections to ensure largely that language is just clearly distinguishing between mandatory regulatory requirements and the supervisory expectations. So there's guidance in there, definite regulatory requirements. So we saw some revisions based on really in areas with risk. It's all about risk, right? So risk-focused BSA supervision. The manual provides instructions to our examiners on how to test, on how to look at all of these analytics. And how to assess our compliance program. And it's basically separating all of our silos. Again, we're going to go into that, but they're trying very hard to segregate all of the things so that if we do have issues, they will be silo issues, right? And they're very much segregated. So they are giving us you know, some minimum set of procedures and expectations, but we're going to look at that a little bit more. But the risk assessment is really where we're going to focus a little bit today. It gives us understanding of how to identify our risks, our services, our products, our customers that are unique to our credit union. It tells us, you know, the manual actually gives us more comfort in that there's no real way to do the risk assessment. You know, it can be based on, it's because every credit union is different. We should have our own format for our risk assessments. And so they can't, you know, nick us for not having a certain way. And there's no requirement also for risk assessments to be updated, let's say on a periodic basis. So there's no like annual this or that. They just want to make sure that you're doing your risk assessment updates when there has been significant changes to either your risk profile your bank profile or anything has changed at your credit union within services, products, geographic location, etc. They're also, the manual also tells examiners that, you know what, hey, you need to give these guys an understanding, a conclusion. You know, after the exam has happened, you know, how did they do? You know, are they in compliance or are they out of compliance? But there's a lot of vagueness, you know, that comes out of exams that kind of just leaves, well, people thinking, I see I have some exceptions, but I'm not really sure the overall status of my compliance program. You want to make sure that you're holding accountable and getting that information when you do have that. So you'll notice that in the presentation where we have been able to, we have added the pages to the exam manual where there have been changes so that you can, at your leisure, go into the link and take a look at those changes. All right, so we're going to take a look now at the risk assessment because we've got our 5 pillars of BSA compliance. We know that we need all 5 of our pillars to hold up our house to make our strong BSA anti-money laundering compliance program, but the risk assessment is really the foundation. So the foundation is what sets us all off. And there's important points about the risk assessment, and they've been outlined in pages 13 to 17 of your exam manual of the update. And some key points about this is that there really has to be a clear connection between your risk assessment and your compliance program. So the part of this that is, there's nothing new about this. This is Appendix I to the BSA compliance manual. It's been there for a long time. The link is there as well. There are many, many appendices that are available for us there. But basically, you take a look at your risk assessment. You identify your services, your products, your customers, your geographic location. And what this chart here is saying is if you look at those things, right, and you identify and you measure your risks associated with those things, it's going to develop appropriate policies, procedures, systems, and controls that will result in a risk-based BSA compliance program that will provide for appropriate internal audits, internal controls, audits, the BSA compliance officer, and training. So everything that your credit union does, broken out into this, identify and measure your risks, right? It means that every product, I do checks, I do wires, I do RTC, I do electronic bill pay, I do ACH. All of those things are listed out, let's just say on your left-hand side. Now you identify the risks associated. Okay, let's just take RDC, the risk associated with RDC, remote deposit capture. Here is my remote deposit capture. Here are the risks that are associated, you know, and what else comes into play? You know, risk levels of your members, you know, maybe that has some impact on that level of risk as well. So we need to make sure that we're looking at it all together, and then we're putting in place the procedures that will mitigate those identified risks that we find. So and then we have a compliance program that is comprehensive and is risk-based, and your examiners are happy, and so is your credit union. Right? But the first step, like we just said, is to identify the specific risk categories. After that, we analyze that data and that specific risk category. We need to make sure that we're updating our risk assessments, right? And assessing that risk assessment as needed. Again, we have to make sure that that all these things are done so that we have developed a compliance program that is based on a risk assessment. You are expected to use this risk-based approach when you're developing your compliance program, right? So the program, again, should take into account your BSA program based on the risk, should take into account the risks that are associated with your membership, high, medium, low, which ones, right? Business accounts, household accounts, the products and services that you're providing your membership, your geographic location will have an impact on your risk assessment, as well as international transactions. So you need to make sure that all of these are understood Once you identify them, then you analyze that information. And what our examiners are looking for is more quantitative and qualitative data. So I shared with you guys a sample risk assessment matrix as part of the handouts. Take a look at that. You know, it's not really hard, but it could be overwhelming. So you just want to make sure that you're giving your risk assessment enough data to really be able to give it some quality. Right, and then how you mitigate each of those risks needs to be documented. And what would those be? Those are your procedures. And there's no required format. This is your program. This is what you need to do. And so you need to just make sure that you understand it, and no required time frame for updating. However, there will be argument, you know, that if things are changing, your risk assessment should be fluid, and your risk assessment should reflect the times of today. And so although there's no required time frame for updating it periodically, there is a requirement for you to update as needed, right? And we know that times are changing. Real big importance right now, your business continuity plan and how you are functioning, you know, during these times, I think really came into play. And so get some credit for that. Make sure that you've documented all that kind of stuff. So your risk assessments. Broad statement, and this is understood. If an institution develops systems and procedures to detect, monitor, and report the riskier customers and transactions, it will increase its chances of staying out of harm's way, right, from criminals and from government sanctions and penalties. That's a big one. Absolutely, you need to make sure that that's what we're doing. So the goal is not to complete the risk assessment. Like I said, it's a tool and it's not an end game. The objective is really to create a meaningful risk assessment and to use it as a tool to identify, prioritize, and to ultimately manage your risk. So again, and also, you know, the risk assessment, however, only focuses and it brings all your attention to your risk, and then we have to do something with it. So what's happened during COVID, right? Let's make sure we've updated our risk assessment, because we do need to make sure that it addresses your current environment. Right, and there have been many areas of increased risk right now. Let's revisit that risk assessment now, and then again, when we come out of this new normal or this normalization, when we get back to normalization, I don't know what it is, but please address this, because there's no way that you can't tell me that things haven't changed, right? Your staff is working remotely. You may have a lack of work staff, right? Increased electronic transactions. I know a lot of our credit unions weren't even doing account opening online, or all sorts of stuff like that have all come into play now. You've got increased risk in this area now. How about the new and modified loan booms, right? What are you doing about all those things? And then really, really quickly on the modified loans, have a way for yourself to segregate those during COVID, you know, just, oh, these were all the loans that were affected by COVID, they're in the red folder. Something quick, you know, something that, you know, just separates for your own peace of mind, because I don't know about you, but I'm feeling like it's like all the time. So I want to make sure that I can make my job as easy as I can. So anything that you can do to help that, do it. So, and then, you know, once we get out of this whole COVID thing, revisit or bring back your regular risk assessment to what is normal again, to that current environment. It's very important, and your examiners will be looking at this. What did you do during COVID? Where is your contingency plan? How did it come into play? Very nice, or not nice, but there it is. All right, risk assessments for working from home is another one that I've seen too, you know, where there are tools now that they can make sure that everyone is secured from all locations. There's so much stuff that we have to look at now. So building the credit union assessment model. You guys, I'm sure, already have a credit union assessment model. You guys are already functioning, but just so that we have an idea, and just in case there's some that don't or haven't necessarily worked with the risk assessment, larger and more complex credit unions obviously would have a more complex model. But for many of us, a low, medium, or high rating system should suffice, right? Some of us might use a numeric system, but don't build a more complicated assessment than you need, because it doesn't work for you. You just want to make it simple. You want to know what your risks, your services, and et cetera are, what the risks are, and how you're mitigating those things. And those are all going to be documented. And really quickly, I think you guys have have, I'll share my, see if I can share my screen this way here. If I bring it here. I lost it.
And Judy, we do have a statement and a question. The first statement is from Suzanne, who said the state of Connecticut wanted us to list branches in a HIDTA in our risk assessment.
HIDTA?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm covering HIDTA in a minute.
Okay. And then the next one is Brian said, nice to see Virginia's cat and would like to know her name.
You saw whose cat? Virginia's got a cat?
Yep.
What's the cat's name, Virginia?
His name is Jasper.
Jasper. Okay, cool. All right, well, I was trying to bring up the sample risk assessment that I had, but oh, there it is. Can you see it now?
No, it's just the
It's not
PowerPoint.
allowing me to do it. All right, well, I sent you all a sample risk assessment. Take a look at that. What we're really finding is that our examiners are really expecting more information on your services, on your products. So for example, you do ATM or you do debit cards. How many debit card holders do you have? What are the risks associated with those? Are they given, or are they different for people that have been in the system longer or new accounts, you know, that kind of thing? So all sorts of qualitative and quantitative information is expected now on your risk assessment, so that they actually have a better understanding of you having an understanding of what's going on at your credit union.
Yeah, and Judy, I'll take you back a little bit on that. I have seen examiners looking for prior year's SAR and CTR counts, just so that way you're showing those quantitative and qualitative factors as what's normal, what's not, right? Has the risk gone up? Has it gone down? They're looking for locations, as you mentioned, ATMs. They want to know where your locations of your ATMs are. Make sure you have that listed. You want to be as descriptive as possible when it comes to the risk assessment.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, let's see. All right, so this whole Zoom thing, I love this thing. I'm like, oh, give me control. All right, so some factors to determine risk certainly depend on all sorts of things, your geographic location, it's just your organization. But you know, risk is dynamic and it needs to be continuously managed. If I haven't said this already, if I haven't gotten into this, it has to be constantly managed and it has to be constantly thought about. So we want to make sure that you've evaluated all sorts of things that they come into play, and new business products are evaluated for money laundering vulnerabilities, and that you've implemented sufficient controls before you launch them into the market. That is why you and your role as a BSA officer is it's important that you have the authority to be able to say, wait a second, you're not rolling out these new products without coming to talk to me first, all right? Or wait a second, lending, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing with CIP, right? You need to have authority to be able to do that, to make sure, because you're the only one that really knows all this stuff. And you're the one that sees all the risks, and you're the one that knows why that was put in place. So make sure that you have the authority to be able to push that information on, and it's independent from your board, it's independent from having money, it's independent from anything else, but you have that ability to do that. All righty, back to the model ago. So a good way for you to approach your assessment is possibly through building blocks. Again, just getting into this, and I know that you guys all have risk assessments, but this is our focus this year because we have to tie it into the program, and there's been obviously none of that, or some of that hasn't been happening. We want to identify our key products. We want to risk assess at each product level. We want to make sure that we're obtaining our management input, or anyone that's involved with any of the services and products. Let's get their input, right? And then you roll the results out through the credit union model. But you want to make sure that all of the things that you know about, that you as a BSA officer know about, that have to be taken care of, are looked at and are identified and mitigated and documented. You're also making sure that you're taking care of OFAC through all this. Levels of risk. Generally, most risk can be broken down into the following levels, right? Prohibited, we know that we can't, or the company will not tolerate we doing any business in this area. And this may be something like cannabis, but not, not for some of our credit unions, but some of them, the company will not tolerate any of these dealings. High risk, well, we know we've got high risk, could be, I have a couple of credit unions that have casinos, well, they're high risk, but they're not prohibited, but we will be looking out for some of these transactions a little bit more. We'll be a little bit more stringent and we'll be more controlling on these high risk accounts. Also medium risk, etc., and low risk, the standard. And this is where most of our credit unions, our members stand anyway. They're mostly low risk standard, money laundering risky people, right? Normal business applies to them and is not a big deal. But you do need to make sure that those types of members are addressed. So what type of risk do your members pose, Generally, the more a person can hide behind trusts and limited liability companies and all that kind of stuff, the more risks there is to that member. So the following customers, if you do have business accounts or that type of thing, these are the types of customers that are considered normally higher risk for money laundering because they do a lot more with cash, right? Cash incentive businesses, restaurants, retail stores, parking, all those types of things. Anyone that has an ATM, I believe I may have sent you guidance on privately owned ATMs. Take a look at that. Because they pose a bit of a risk as well. And you want to make sure that you are identifying that particular member as having a privately owned ATM on their premises, if so. All right. So you want to...
And we are getting to 10 o'clock.
Oh, we are. Oh, everyone's got coffee? All right, so let me just check my next slide. Thank you. Let's get past the risk really quickly, and then we'll stop. Because I think right after that, we're going to go into transaction monitoring and it shouldn't be too much. And actually, we know about risk, but your geographic location also definitely different for everybody else's, and why everyone says we don't have to have, there's no certain format to the BSA risk assessment, or it's because we're all so different and our locations are different. We may be in a high intensity drug trafficking area. We may be in a high intensity financial crime area, but certainly there's a lot of stuff, the population, a credit union in a rural area of Vermont may not have the same, does not have the same risk as someone in New York City. Even if you had the same amount of transactions, it's based off something else. So your whole geographic location impacts your credit union's risk assessment, but it could be either positively or negatively, but it's not the one thing you need to look at. So it's everything together in your risk assessment, and geographic is another one of those considerations. Here are the high risk areas for financial crimes. Now, Suzanne, you said that they asked us, Connecticut, to be on crimes, or is it a HIBTA that they were looking at?
I believe they're looking at the HITTA, and I have seen this as well with the auditors. The examiners are looking, if you are in a HITTA area, you have that listed on your risk assessment. That does need to be in there.
Okay, so that's what that's what that was.
Yeah, they want you to be more detailed what branches, what location is in that area. So, and highlighted, the Fairfield is in Connecticut. You want to list how many branches and what those locations are in Fairfield. So if you have more, you have that.
All right, so just really quickly going back here, you'll see that we are not in a high risk area for financial crimes, but New York is, right? And we do have that, so they're not too far from us. And then comes our high intensity drug trafficking areas, where Connecticut and Vermont have certain counties that we need to address, like Shannon was just stating. Products and services, really quickly. We know that certain products and services create different risks, and more than likely, the higher degree of anonymity, the less face time that's involved with any type of transaction, the more risk that is involved with that particular product, right? So we want to make sure that we're taking care of and we think correctly, and we've made sure that we're addressing these risks. Nothing more, nothing new there. Certain products. So here's just a list of some things that could be considered higher risk, but you want to make sure that you're looking at all of these things. Certainly listing. I think most of us do most of these services, maybe not private banking, but all of these areas are things where you have to kind of break out and then analyze, collect the data and analyze, and any other services and products that you might provide. I think we're coming to the end. So some questions that you might want to ask yourselves as you are rolling out new products, volume of transactions, how quickly does that happen? Do we allow all our members to engage in the transactions with minimal, oversight? How do we take care of the issues, non-face-to-face issues, from our users? All sorts of things that you can be asking based on the product that you have, payments to third parties and unusual complexities, things like that should have consideration in your rolling out of new products. And again, your risk, you as an officer should be involved. But once the risk has been identified, then you have to handle or decide how to handle how you're going to handle that risk on an ongoing basis. So you can reduce product risk by obviously changing the base practices, imposing dollar or location limitations, imposing member limitations. We all have to monitor transactions, so monitoring that risk is something that we would reduce. We would reduce our risk by monitoring, and restricting certain products and services to some members is also a method to lower the risk. All right, so we're going to take a break, and then we'll run into the next pillar of BSA, which is your policies, your procedures, and internal controls. But does anyone have any questions before we go? Okay, 15 minutes, and we'll see you back here at about, let's take 10 minutes. It's 10:15.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. I feel like there's something I'm supposed to be doing, but this is it so easy now. All right, guys. We'll get started with, is everyone back now? I'm hoping that everyone's back. It's a little bit past 10:16. So we'll get started with the policies, procedures, and internal controls pillar of the compliance program. Again, based on your BSA risk assessment, right? That's the foundation. So our BSA internal controls really incorporate the risk assessment, as we've been stating. The controls also provide continuity. They provide and facilitate oversight of information technology, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Timely updates to our board. Dual control is really big, and there is a lot of focus on the dual control element of all of our processes and procedures right now to make sure that things are done. Again, this is all about fraud and everything, so the dual control really comes into play heavily under our policies and procedures. Information to the board, we need to make sure that we're informing them, and the specific BSA responsibilities are outlined and assigned to appropriate personnel. What happened there? All right. So it's important to note that there have been some new changes, and here's the allergy, and I'm apologizing, but I just had the cat in my hand. And these exam changes are on pages 21 and 23 of the manual update. And so basically, again, everything in this manual is giving information to our examiners on what they should be focused on with us, but it gives us insight onto what they're looking at and how they're looking at us, right? And we can prepare based on that information. So they have to, and they're asked to, determine whether or not we've incorporated that anti-money laundering risk assessment into our policies, whether or not it provides for program continuity despite changes in operation and management. So this is an area that our examiners are going to be looking at a lot, especially with COVID, right? That they facilitate oversight of information technology sources, so system and processes that support your BSA compliance should also be looked at, because your examiners will be paying attention to that, and whether or not you will provide for timely updates in response to changes to regulations, your dual control, the segregation of duties to the extent possible. I know some of us have very few employees, and some of the dual control functions are almost impossible. But they are looking at that, and so hopefully you have other ways to mitigate any risks that are associated with not having that dual control. So for example, counting money, bulk money. I know that some credit unions, our credit unions in Connecticut, don't have the staff to do dual control, but they have a camera in the area that they are counting the cash. So that mitigates any possible risk that wouldn't have, that would have been caught by dual control. So that's a way to deal with that. Also, the functions such as suspicious activity reports and CTRs really should be looked on with a set of a couple of sets of eyes before the final decisions to report these and also grant exemptions under CTRs are granted. So again, information to the board. Your program, really, your internal controls should include mechanisms, flags to make sure that the board is updated with all the information that they need to be. Do take a look at the internal controls examination procedures that are on page 23 of the examination manual, because they do go into identifying and establishing, specific BSA compliance responsibilities, etc. I apologize. I'm feeling it come on now, and all right, so let's get into the systems that you have to identify, research, and to report suspicious activity, because this is what it's all about, right? So we know we have all sorts of stuff and we've done our risk assessment, but this is really what this whole regulation is all about. It's be able to identify, research, and report that activity. So we should, again and again, we reiterate a lot, but it has to be because it shows up in many places and it's so interconnected that, again, to tell you that we need written board approved policies and procedures to identify and report transactions to law enforcement, yeah, I get it, but that's what we need. We also need to establish our risk-based procedures, monitoring systems that typically include employee identification or referrals, maybe transaction-based. Some of our manual monitoring systems are us, right? That's it. We are the manual monitoring systems. But sometimes we do have help from automated systems. And many times I find that our credit unions are using a combination of both of these two functions, right? So it's a manual review of automated reports, etc. But this monitoring and reporting are actually critical internal controls that we should have available. So the transaction monitoring part of this is really part that I want to focus, because there's a lot of stuff that our credit unions do that that they're comfortable with, and they are following regulation per se, but they're not necessarily doing anything other than record keeping, right? So it really is important for you to understand that if you are doing wires, if you're doing cashier's checks, if you're doing anything at all, it's great that you're documenting all that stuff. But the whole purpose of BSA is to be able to document that stuff in a manner that will give you ability to manipulate the data so that you can see if it's suspicious or not, right? So I appreciate many of our smaller credit unions, like for example, they do wires and they print their wire sheets one after another and they stack them one after another. But there's no way to really look at it holistically over the course of a month or a quarter or a year to tell you whether or not there's anything that's suspicious, because one day's activity not necessarily amounts to anything. So you want to make sure that you have policies and procedures in place to identify and to monitor transactions for all the services and products that you provide your members, right? So, and you're also on a daily or weekly or monthly, quarterly basis, you're looking at all your records either from your from your core system and management information systems. And if you have a BSA monitoring system, you're looking at those alerts there, and also you're completing your 314A and your OFAC list, et cetera. There's so many areas for you to look at transactions. It's not even funny, right? So hopefully, if you are a larger credit union, you do have assistance with with an automated system. So while reporting procedures may vary, we should have at least a method of doing that. So procedures to identify potential suspicious activities or transactions, a formal evaluation of each instance and continuation of unusual transactions or activity. You want to make sure that you're documenting your suspicious transactions, reporting your transaction reporting decision, whether you filed it with the authorities or not. And I provided you a suspicious activity incident report sample that you can use from maybe from a teller's perspective or from any department at your credit union. This would be something that would funnel up to you as the BSA officer, but it gives you everything that you might need regarding that suspicious activity, and it's just a report on the incident. So and then it's kept confidential. But these are procedures that you could have in place, and that form would help a lot in that. Ask yourself now too, you have policies and procedures that have been in place, they've been approved, they've been done, but then, your risk changed because of COVID and things went, different, right? And you couldn't do everything the way you were doing it before. So this is part of your contingency plan. And this is something that our examiners are really looking at, like, how did you function when you weren't in the office? Can your processes be done completely from home, remotely, and how, right? And can they be, and can security be effectively maintained? Who is your backup in case you can't be there, and do you have more than one backup? And are they well trained? Do you have a list of your daily, your weekly, your monthly protocols, your procedures, things like that, have to happen under BSA? Who's doing them if you're not there? And how are they happening if your credit union is closed? Very important. And I know that you guys have done so much during these past few months that it'd be a shame if you didn't get credit for documenting what you've done. So while it's fresh in your mind, go in and document some of the things that you had to change temporarily, and then you can go back to doing things the way they were before, but you should take into account what you've done now. Filing, all your reports from home, are you able to do them? Have you tested? Right, because I don't think that that this is going away anytime soon, real soon anyway. And so,
and Judy, a question was, do you have to back it up?
What do you mean by back it up?
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I think it was Gretchen.
No, I was asking, do you have to have a backup?
Yes, you should. Yeah. So I'll give you a story. I had a credit union that had very small credit union with 2 employees. And one of the first things, that we did when we went into there was we did our training, we did our reviews and all that stuff. And I looked at this woman and I said, do you have a backup? Do you have your procedures written out? Do you have a backup? And she said, oh yeah, well, she's my backup, and I don't have procedures, but she knows everything we do, and we do everything here the same, and that's fine. I'm like, okay, but I really suggest you do have a backup and you do have your written procedures. And I came back the next year to do another audit, and they still didn't have that. And again, we talked about it. What ended up happening, and I'm bringing it full forth really quickly, was this lady passed away and left her credit union with no written procedures, and the backup, because she was so hurt by this woman's passing, couldn't be the backup. So she resigned. So left the credit union standing without policies, procedures, or a backup. It's important as part of your contingency plan to have someone that can carry out the functions of BSA if you can't, even if it's your board member. You need someone there to be able to do what you can't if you couldn't. And of course, now, obviously, with the whole COVID, how do you function from home and can you do that securely has come to play, right? And we want to make sure that we're addressing those things. All right, so,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
A little delayed, I know, but hopefully that made sense. And I'm so very sorry, but I really am very itchy, and it's the cats. It's not like I'm doing coke or anything here. I'm just itchy. Anyway, I always have that fear of like, oh my God, what are people thinking? My nose is itchy. Anyway, so let's get started with the customer due diligence portion of the BSA compliance program. And that's another pillar, right? And this is what they're considering now the 5th pillar, but it's always been here. It's just been under the MIP program. And it's now been enhanced or more showcased more because of the beneficial owner rule. And so there's customer due diligence that comes out of the beneficial owner rule that comes into play here with the member identification part. So I'm going to take you through the first part of the member identification program, and then Shannon's going to take you through the beneficial owner part. So the MIP, CIP, the purpose of this obviously is to assist in the detection and prevention of money laundering and terrorist financing. And the focus of this program are those individuals and businesses that are opening new accounts at your credit union, to include joint account holders and co-borrowers. So anyone that has any kind of relationship, and it has to be a formal relationship with your credit union, should go through the formal MIP program, right? And the MIP, you are required to verify the identity of people and businesses with which you do business and make sure that they're not on any government issued list. So specifically, you must do 5 things when you're opening a new account. You must provide the disclosure, you know, the Patriot Act, and we'll talk about that. You know, we may ask you for certain identifying information, but you know, it's just for this purpose. You must obtain account holder information. You must verify his or her identity. You must check them against the government list, which is the OFAC list, and you must retain records. In a nutshell, that's what we're doing. So for account opening, the information that's required for each new member that opens an account, you should be asking for any, you know, their names or maiden names or anything that you can get. As much information as you can at account opening is imperative. A correct permanent address. It must be a physical address, no PO boxes unless it's just for mailing statements, etc., which is perfectly fine, but you do need to have a physical address. And then you must verify that address if it's different from the ID address that's being provided to you, okay? Telephone and fax numbers and email addresses, get it all, get it all. You know that later on down the road, you're kicking yourself for not getting their email and you wanna start an email campaign and it's not there, all right? So just get information, date of birth, occupation, the position held, and the name of the employer. Please do so, especially as things change and cannabis comes in and all these other things have already been in. You want to know where people are working because that might change your idea of the risk that's associated with that particular member. And also, and it's within your rights to ask for this information. The type of account and the nature of the banking relationship. What's the scope of our relationship? You know, is this a household account? Is it a business account? What will you be doing with it? You need the member's signature, an identification number for a U.S. person. That ID number is the taxpayer ID number. For a non-U.S. person, it can be a taxpayer ID number, but you can use a passport with a country of issuance, an alien identification card number, or any other type of government issued document that bears a similar safeguard to ours, like with photos and seals and that kind of stuff, is acceptable. Do confirm and validate those, however. For a business, the identification number is the employer identification number. I think I was trying to make a point. Verify that current mail. If it's different, please. And what I do when I do an audit, and most auditors do, if they see the account card when they're asking you for proof or showing, you know, you're showing them the last however many account cards that you open, and if they see a different address on the account card than what's on the ID, they're going to ask you for what you use to verify that. And so keep a copy of that piece of mail or letter or whatever you use to verify the address in that file. Because remember, you want to make sure you've got the right address in there. And why? Because you're creating a file for the police. Here you go. Here you go. Go find them. This is the address that I know is very correct. And here's their, and this is what the, you know, everything that you have on that person is in that file. All righty. So let's talk a little bit about the expired driver's licenses. I know Connecticut, we have had some expiration dates that have some credentials that had expiration dates expire, but they are valid. And basically anything that from March 10th through May 31st in Connecticut, our driver's licenses are valid to the end of this month, November 30th. And then anything from June 1st through November 30th that needed to be that needed to be renewed has until December 31st of this year to do that. Now, Vermont, I know that your credentials that expired as of March 17th were issued a 90-day extension that is effective until the state of emergency is done. That's been declared by your governor. But you also have this thing that you have, where Vermont is encouraging residents to keep their licenses and registrations current by renewing online, which is great. So you have an online renewal process that Connecticut does not have for licenses, but you are still in that state of emergency from what I understand, and they are still valid. So you can take them, you just maybe want to add additional layers of ID or documentation to your verification process. So your policy, so all of these things, a little bit of a change here, right? You want to make sure that you're informing your staff about these changes so that they know what to expect at account opening. And your policy should also address any other types of identification that you will accept in lieu of a driver's license in the event that you want that as well, or instead of. So the Real ID is here, right? And this is what they look like starting October 2021. The U.S. federal government will require anyone that's boarding airplanes and entering certain federal buildings to have this verified address, a verified driver's license or state issued ID, and it's to be required as proof of identification.
Selena just wanted to ask a question. She said, we have been seeing more IDs issued without pictures or signatures. How do you handle those? The state valid without signature or picture?
So in Connecticut, this is what the Connecticut driver's licenses look like. This is what Vermont driver's license look like. I've never seen a driver's license without a picture.
Is that maybe?
Oh, they're like, I don't know, there used to be like a green plastic card, but
what are those?
They actually look like the state issued driver's licenses in your pictures, except it has a block where the picture would be, and it says valid without picture. And then there were some that came across without a signature. I think they're reissued by mail and it says valid without signature.
Well, maybe those are the ones that are coming through and is that just now recently?
Within the past couple months.
So that may be something we can look into that, but that may just be as a response to the, excuse me, I just dropped my glasses, maybe a response to the online renewal of licenses because of COVID. So if that's what Vermont has set up, I would go through their website, the Department of Motor Vehicle, and their Secretary of State website, and just determine what is and what isn't, legit.
yeah, so, Stacy said that she's heard from Vermont DMV that they are valid, but I got mine done through the mail and mine has the signature on it.
And your picture?
Yeah, picture. I did it all by mail.
Huh?
So what I would recommend is going back to your CIP policy. If your CIP policy states it has to have a picture ID, then what you can do is follow up, right? So maybe you have a tickler, maybe you open that account with the original and you state that within the next 30 days, you need to provide a picture ID, the actual one when you get it in the mail, or maybe you need a passport. I would go back to your policies, right? Because your procedures need to match your policies. So I would definitely take that into consideration.
And then Stacy followed up by saying the first one she saw was a permit, which would be true because you can take your permit now online and they're probably just issuing that blank card ID.
Right. Yeah, so I would look for a second form.
Yeah, so exactly that. So you've got these real IDs and you've got anything with BSA, you know, if you're not comfortable with the first form of ID, you have, and those are the documentary methods, we have the undocumentary methods to fall back on, and we have opportunity to ask for other forms of ID to back up your initial. So if you feel uncomfortable with that one, no picture, you want to make sure that you've got something. Ask for a passport, ask for something else that you're within your rights to ask for, and it's very very applicable. No worries with that. So I hope that answered your question, Selena. Okay. All righty. So like I said, and this is it, we have opportunity to also use our databases, our check systems, credit bureaus, references from other financial institutions, you know, mail, bills, that kind of stuff. You want to form a reasonable belief that you know that person's identity. Use whatever methods you have available to you if you want to open that account. However, I do suggest you have something that's more on the documentary form as well. You know, there's so many different types of accounts. I know that one of your credit unions in your area is very close to Canada, and some of doing a lot of account opening for those that may not have documentation, right? So your CIP program is more than likely quite different than the rest of ours, but you have certain you know, risks that others don't, and you've identified them. But yeah, all different, but just make sure that you verify the information. So elements of a member due diligence program really is about identifying and verifying your account holder, identifying and verifying the identity of your beneficial owners and legal entity customers at account opening, understanding the nature and scope of that account holder relationship, right? So that you can, and here's a big one, you need to develop an account holder risk profile. With every member that you have coming in that door, you should determine whether that is a high, medium, or low risk. And it would be dependent upon the services and products, again, that you may need that member or that person's asking for. But you have to understand that, and you do need to develop a risk rating on that member. Conducting ongoing monitoring to identify and report suspicious infractions on a risk basis, and maintain updated account holder information. And this is a big one. You know, everyone thinks that, okay, your BSA, your account was open, it's a one-time said and done, and no. You are required under BSA to update records of your members as needed. So no, you don't have a once a year kind of periodic update, but it is event triggered. And so if that member or any member, business or or just customer, comes in to ask you for a loan, check, or cash a check, or anything else, it's asking you to do something. That's your opportunity to update your records, right? And so you need to make sure that you've, oh, hey, Judy, we haven't seen your your ID in a long time. Let's just make sure that we have everything up to date. Really quickly, I hand you my ID and you got that information and you put it into the screen, you've confirmed, and you're done. You're going to need that for CTRs and everything else anyway. So make sure that you're going, that you're updating and maintaining your records on your account holders. And your due diligence policies are really meant to aid and to assist you in understanding what normal activity in any account is. So you should be able to collect information on that member that will be able to give you the predictability of, or to understand what normal activity is on that account. And certainly it would be varied on what that member risk, or the risk that that member presented would be. But you want to make sure that you're able to provide, you want to ask them, hey, Judy, we want to give you the best services and products available. What can we expect from your account? Will you be doing wires? Is there a lot of ACH that you'll be needing? How about international wires? Getting an understanding of that relationship is really important, because when, in a few weeks or in a few months, when Judy said, I'll do no wires, you start seeing a ton of international wires going in or out of my account. Those are the red flags that you're looking for, right? And this is important. The member due diligence aspect of the whole program is giving you the opportunity to establish the baseline for that member. And that's really important going forward. Some additional procedures that you want to consider, and then we talked about here, obviously, additional verification for certain cases, when you might need additional ID. The credit union is unfamiliar with the type of ID, whether accounts will be granted on a provisional basis until verification is complete needs to be addressed in your policy. So, you know, do you open accounts and then if they don't come back within 10 days, you close the account because they didn't provide you with all the documentation? Or do you say, you know, we don't open an account until all the documentation is at the credit union in hand? Whatever it is, your policy should be reflective of that. So don't let them both, you know, be different, because that will be something your examiner is looking at. Because then what that means is if you allow provisional based accounts until you can verify, that means you've got a stack of accounts possibly over here with that you haven't been able to verify their social security numbers, whether maybe you don't have social security numbers for. So they're going to ask you for a list of those accounts. So if you don't do that, get it out of your policy. And they want to make sure that you open the account with you know, if, like I said, if you didn't have proper documentation and if the member is not present. OFAC also has a say in everything. They want to make sure that you're doing all new member verifications through OFAC before the first transaction goes through. All right, I'll let my friend Shannon take over, and she'll go into the beneficial owner rules and the importance of them. Thank you.
Based this actually extends from the member due diligence. So, you know, in May of 2018, they amended the anti-money laundering program requirements by adding a minimum. This is just a minimum requirement that institutions implement a risk-based procedure conducting ongoing due diligence, including understanding the nature and purpose of customer relationships. So because this is at a minimum, you need to make sure that you're gathering the nature and the purpose of a customer relationship to develop that risk profile, right? So that goes back to asking those questions, you know, are you going to do wires? And with the business, on the business side, you want to know what type of business it is, and you know what they're going to be using the account for. Is this going to be a, you know, just for paying my employees? Is it a payroll account? Is this going to be the spending account? Because this will set your foundation, right, going forward. The beneficial ownership rule, those requirements are identify. Oh, we're going backwards here. There we go. You are going to want to identify and verify the customers who open the account, right? You're going to need to identify and verify the beneficial owners with 25% or more equity or interest of a legal entity. So even though Joe comes into an account, comes into your institution to open an account, you need to ask if there are any other owners, because Mary, his wife, may be above 25% of interest. She's just not going to be on this account because she doesn't ever have time to come into the institution. So, you know, she doesn't need to be here. You still need to be asking for that information. You need to understand the nature and purpose, as I said, and conduct ongoing monitoring to report suspicious activity. Judy has been kind enough to list some links in here, so that way you can see that rule and get, you know, the actual information on it if you have time to go through it. I'm going to go a little bit into the PPP program, and the reason I'm doing this is because with the beneficial ownership information, you need to make sure you gather certain documentation, right? You need the name, their date of birth, and the social security number, and you need to run that OFAC check, right? With the PPP, there are a few exceptions, and that is if the member is opening a PPP loan and just the loan itself. FinCEN is saying that you are not required to get that beneficial ownership documentation. Right? So this is for PPP loans only, and I just want to stress that. Any other type of loan, you do need to get that beneficial ownership information in. And we're going to go through this a little bit more in depth in a few minutes. Which rules do these accounts apply to? The new beneficial ownership rule does apply to all account opening, besides those PPPs right now, all accounts opened, including checking or savings, on or after May 11th, right? So we need to make sure that any new account opening, we're gathering that beneficial ownership documentation. We're gathering it for corporations, LLCs. You're going to do it for sole props. The only thing it does not include is trusts, and not include sole props, because they're a sole prop, right? They're not going to have that other 25% on there. These are just some excluded legal entities, which would be a banking organization, some of the bigger organizations, state-related, foreign financial institutions that have been established in jurisdictions that have beneficial ownership reporting regimes, right? So that's going to be, more the municipality accounts. And of course, it's going to start going crazy on me again. So you must follow your institution's procedures to identify and verify the identity of beneficial owners, right? So this is those procedures we were talking about. You want to make sure your procedures are in place, and you want to make sure they match your policy. You are required to verify the identity of your account holders under your MIP policies. So there is a recertification. If you have already opened the account for the member, they've already filled out the beneficial ownership, you can rely on that information to be fulfilled for subsequent accounts. However, you want to make sure that you're verifying that information is still correct, right? So if the member comes in and they had a checking and a savings, and they need to open a separate savings account, you need to just verify that those beneficial owners have not changed. And you need to make sure you confirm that verbally or in writing. And if it's verbally, you want to make sure you document that somewhere. The member had verbally stated that this was true and accurate. And that is up to date as of this date, right? So even though it is verbally, you want to make sure you're documenting, right? That's the key to BSA. Document, document, document. All right, and so I'm going to give you the answer to the test before I ask the question. So ownership prong, required to identify 0 to 4 individuals. So
basically, I think what they're trying to do here with this is more so that there's a 2-pronged test to determine who has ownership in a business, and they're asking you, there are 2 separate tests to determine, and one of them is the ownership rule, and then there's another prong that'll come up in a minute. Control. It's the control prong. So anyone that has any individual that has significant responsibility to control, manage, or direct the company would need to go through the CIP program, or the Beneficial Owners Rule program. So again, it's just a lot of information on all of the people that are involved in that business, as if they were individuals, in a sense.
Yeah, right. You want to follow pretty much your MIP policy as far as, getting that due diligence on the ID and the OFAC check, right? You want to make sure OFAC is run on any one of them. PPP loans, what I was saying, we're going to come
on screen. Go back one. I don't know what the other screen said. We do need to talk a little bit about enhanced due diligence, because there is the due diligence aspect of opening an account for a household, right? And you have certain questions that you use and that you ask, and I would suggest using a checklist at account opening with the due diligence questions, like the things that I asked. Hey, Judy, we want to provide you services and products. What can we expect? And most credit unions have a checklist of all of their services and products, and they can go off and check off the things that they need and the conversations that they've had. They've done their OFAC verification, etc. Well, for your higher risk accounts, whether it is even if it's not a business account, you have opportunity to do, and you should be doing, enhanced due diligence on those members. And so your business accounts, you should be asking things like, where are your source of funds coming from? The type of business. You should be asking for financial records and references from institutions, banking institutions. You want to know where that business is located and its proximity to your credit union, because, all right, well, why are you opening an account here? When your business is in Connecticut, no, something's up. The description of your primary business area, and also the operations and that kind of thing. thing. So some of our credit unions will also, and it is recommended to visit businesses to make sure that they're not just shell companies, you know. So there's a lot of work that you have as a compliance officer. Managing that risk is the biggest duty. Identifying where to focus yourself is another one. You know, you've got so many different things, but this is all risk-based. So focus first on the things that are higher risk to you and your credit union.
Mhm.
Okay, and even if that includes getting over to those businesses to confirm. So
Right.
protection.
Mhm. Yep. Going back to the PPP loans, credit unions do need to follow their existing BSA protocol when making PPP loans to either new or existing members who are eligible borrowers, meaning that you still retrieve all that CIP documentation and that you are doing that member due diligence. PPP loans for existing members will not require re-verification under the BSA requirements unless otherwise indicated by the institution's risk-based approach. And like we say, everything comes down to your risk, right? So if you're looking at the application and it's a higher risk business, you're gonna wanna look into your procedures. And if they say enhanced due diligence is required at the time of account opening, you're gonna wanna follow that. Follow your policies, follow your procedures. Credit unions should understand the nature and purpose of their PPP customer relationships to develop customer risk profiles. Again, and we'll go into this a little further. We have seen fraudulent PPP loan applications coming through and things along that nature. So just because, you know, the PPP program, yes, we want to help our members, right? That's what it's there for. It's to help them, and we want to walk them through that process, but you want to make sure that you're also covering your institution. And I'm just gonna, there was some FinCEN guidance that was on April 13th for PPP loans. And it does state that the PPP for the beneficial ownership only needs to be filled out on new borrowers, not for existing. But it also states that you can use the information off of your PPP loan application for your beneficial ownership. And that is due to the fact that the new PP with the PPP loan application, you are required to list any beneficial owners 20% or more, right? So that's below the 25% threshold. So you can use that information for the beneficial ownership. Just keep in mind that the PPP loan application does not contain the date of birth. So you may want to request ID verification for those applicants, just so that way you're following all those MIP and CIP rules, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and really quickly, although, you know, and I know that, you know, some of these guidances and stuff for the PPP, and I don't know which one, but I do recall seeing something that we don't have to do as much due diligence on some of these PPP loans. Forget that, and do your due diligence. You know what your credit union, you know, we're credit unions for a reason, right? And we're credit unions and we do the right thing all the time anyway. So do your due diligence. It's what's kept us out of trouble all this time, and it's what's going to keep us out of trouble going forward. So if you can get your MIP information on your PPP loans, even for for new members, do it. Do it.
Yeah, and again, it falls back to your policies and procedures, right? If it says you're going to update it, you're going to want to update it.
Indirect lending.
Yeah. Same thing with indirect lending. You're going to want to make sure you follow your CIP procedures. Now, credit unions may contract third-party services to verify and validate MIP requirements, but you need to make sure that they're still following that, right? So yes, a credit union may use an agent for verifying member identity, such as the car dealer or a mortgage broker, but you need to remember that the credit union is still responsible for the agent's compliance, and any failures to verify that member ID will fall back on the credit union. So you need to use your risk-based approach, and you need to make sure that you're following the correct policies and procedures and verifying that all the correct information is coming over.
Right. So really what you're doing there is verifying that your third party has the right procedures and policies in place to comply with BSA. That's your responsibility. And if you are having if you do have a third-party relationship, when you have an audit, your auditor will be asking you for that information on that third party to see where that line is. You know, what are they doing for you and what are you doing? And even though that's happening, you're still doing it too, right? That's what they're looking for. So, okay.
Yeah, and SIP does apply for your employees as well, right? You need to know your employees. Institutions, businesses, as you know, we've seen a greater expense of loss can pose the same threat, money laundering, as a customer, right? So your employees have access to all of this information, right? And they have more access than your actual customer does. So you want to make sure that you have a know your employee program established, and that just means the institution has a program in place that allows it to understand the employee's background, conflicts of interest, and susceptibility to money laundering, right? So if you have someone, if you only have one employee who's handling your SARS and your cash flow at the same time, that might be a conflict of interest, right? Because now they might be able to hide something along there. So you want dual control, make sure you have an employee that is credible and that you trust behind the line. You have policies and procedures, again, with any type of anything that you do in your credit union.
And also, just really as a quick note, you want to make sure that they understand your employees when they come into employment with your credit union, that there is a level of confidentiality that comes along with the position. And hopefully your HR department will have them sign that, you know, and they understand the importance of confidentiality, and the restrictions under BSA should be outlined as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 1 minute to the hour.
Okay, and this is a good spot, good too. We're almost done with this section.
Yeah. Okay. So we're just going to run into OFAC very quickly. And OFAC, we know, needs to be run. And OFAC is a hot spot, right? We're going to say for examiners. Examiners have been focusing on OFAC, making sure you're running it at the appropriate times and making sure you're running it on the appropriate identities. You make sure that you compare the compliance with OFAC rules needs to be a priority, okay? Although OFAC is not a financial institution supervisory agency, it works closely with them at federal and state levels. And as I said, the examiner is routinely asked to see OFAC compliance during examinations, making sure that you are running on time. And making sure that if you do have a hit, that you are following your procedures and your policies. What are you going to do if it comes up on the list? Are you going to verify that member? If it's a member that is an exact match, what are you going to do? What's your policy? What's your procedure? You need to make sure that you are prepared for that, and that you understand that you are obligated not only to block or reject an OFAC hit, but you also need to notify OFAC. Okay, so your first step would be to notify OFAC for further instructions, right? Block that instant, freeze that, and contact OFAC. And then just real quickly, your member notice requirement, credit unions are required to notify a member of it to comply with identification and verification provisions with SIP.
And that's basically your Patriot Act, right? We know that it's in your lobbies. We know that it's in your, it's online on your website if you do online account opening. But it should definitely be in your lobby, anywhere you open an account. And actually, if for some reason you had a blind member, you need to give them the Patriot Act verbally and then make a note on their account card, because it is a requirement for everyone to receive this disclosure. All right, well, with that said, we're going to leave it there. We'll take another break. Guys, go get some coffee, stretch your legs, and we'll be back here at 11:15. 11:15. We'll just get started. All right, so member notice, we just took care of that. All right, let's look at the filing of BSA reports and what we understand. We know that during COVID, BSA compliance is crucial, even during COVID. It's actually so much more important because of a lot of the things that are happening. But, you know, some of our credit unions I know have been concerned that they can't file reports on time, and their FinCEN has addressed that. But you would ask, FinCEN is actually giving us some guidance, and I'll show you in a few screens what that's about. But they want you to contact FinCEN and your primary regulator as soon as possible if you're having any issues with not being able to file your reports on time, either because, you know, you're home or you're doing things that's different. And so they've accommodated for that, but not for long. So make sure that you've tested your filing abilities from home, and your CTR processes and SAR processes. Can they be done completely from home, and how are you doing them? Because like I said, there was a little understanding on some CTRs and getting them in on time, but for the most part, there hasn't been any exceptions granted during COVID for BSA reports. So if you have to contact FinCEN about COVID-related matters, they've given us, I'm sorry, wait a second, a definite place to go, and it's on their website, and there's a click on assistance button, and this is what the, this is what the screen looks like when you go to FinCEN. You get to their website, it's www.fincen.gov, and on the BSA section, you will see contact FinCEN for need assistance, and you will get in touch with them, and they'll reach out to you regarding any of the information. But you would have, there's a drop-down menu here to select the subject you're inquiring about, and you would submit that and then let them get back to you. But do try to have a plan of action in place. Don't just call them and say, hey, I have no way of filing these. You want to make sure that when you do call, you're saying, hey, I have no way of filing these right now, but here's what I'm doing to rectify, and I should have them done by X date. So you want to make sure that that's how you're communicating with FinCEN as well as your regulator. So let's take a look at some definitions from large currency transaction reporting. We know what a credit union is, and anywhere in our presentation and in the BSA manual that bank is referenced, please understand that they mean credit union as well. So a credit union is considered a bank. Large means over $10,000. Person is anyone that's conducting a transaction versus person on whose behalf transaction is conducted. That's different. And there's a difference between a sole proprietorship versus a legal entity. Also, business day depends on your institution. So if you're doing things on Saturday, that counts. Transaction in currency means actual tangible cash in out of your organization or out of. So if anyone's walking in with or walking out with, that's when it counts. All right, so we are required as credit unions, and this is nothing new. Like I said, all the updates in the manual have nothing really to do with material stuff, but more so on how, you know, examiners are going to be focused on us, so that gives us an insight. We are required to report any deposits, withdrawal, transfers, and any other transactions that involve currency, tangible cash coming in or going out of our credit union that exceeds $10,000. So at 10,001 cents, you are reporting on a CTR, not to get anyone in trouble, right? It's just reporting to the government. This would include single and multiple transactions that are made on the same day. You would aggregate your weekends, your ATM and night deposits transactions also have to be accounted for, and you would add them at all your deposits and at all your withdrawals, but you would not subtract them from the other. It also includes transactions that are made by the member or on behalf of the member. And I slowed down for that one because as much as right now, most most of the time our CTRs, we're just dealing with our members. But during COVID, you may have found that there may be people coming in to take care of things for your elderly population, let's just say. So it may not be the transaction being made by me. I've sent my daughter to make the deposit or to make the loan payment, and it's over $10,000. So you want to make sure that you are getting the right information, and we'll get into that a little bit more too. But the CTRs must be filed within 15 days of the transaction. And also, as a note, P2P and A to A, those are your person to person and the account to account transactions that are all over the place. That yes, there's a lot of risk associated with those two areas, and we're trying to figure that out, but they are not subject to CTR reporting requirements because there's nothing really coming in, but they, no real tangible cash. But they are subject to SAR monitoring and transaction monitoring, SAR reporting. So do keep that in mind. Some guidance on some multiple businesses and some guidance on how to CTR file for multiple businesses by the same person. So really what this is all about is making sure that we've got separation, right? That if we have a member with a personal account and then the member also has a business account, that we are segregating these types of accounts. And even if a member has two business accounts, we're segregating that separately. We want to make sure that we are separating as much as the entity allows for. Now, and you have to do your work, you know, when you start getting, you know, when Judy comes in and she's got a deposit for ABC company and then a deposit for a CDY company, you want to see how much of that is actually interaction is melting over, because if you can tell that they are actually separate entities, you should be filing CTRs separately for them. But if you can determine that a business is operating cohesively with another one, then you want to aggregate. Okay. So if you determine that the businesses are not operating separately of one another and or to their common owner, then you need to make sure that your staff is understanding of that and that you are taking care of filing that CTR correctly. And you're aggregating those amounts. So there's no universal rule applicable, obviously, to any one situation. But once you determine that a business is independent, it should not aggregate those transactions. So again, both just it requires a little due diligence if you do have that situation. And the importance of proper CTR filing. So we're going to talk about a lot of that because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's allowed for a CTR filing, right? So prior to completing a CTR transaction, and this comes partly from, you know, I'm just going to put the whole screen up really quickly so that I can talk to you about this. Prior to completing a CTR, you know that the CTR requirements require identification, right? So luckily, most of our members, you have that identification in-house and it's there, right? But let's just say, like I gave you that instance a minute ago, you know, I come in to make the payment for a loan for my mother and it's $12,000 payment. Well, wait a second, you don't have any of my ID information, right? But CTR requirements say that you have to have an ID. So you're going to have to ask me for that ID. And this is more common now. You have to realize that this is going to be happening much more frequently. So you get my ID, but let's just say you're filling it out on me and I am your member. Please remember that even though some of those fields may not be asterisked on the CTR or SAR forms, it doesn't mean that you're not supposed to put that information in. It just means that it won't kick it out. Right? But it will give opportunity for FinCEN and your examiner to say, wait a minute, you're not completing these CTRs correctly. You're not completing them completely, right? There's no reason you have, there'd be no reason for you not to be able to fill out ID. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to fill out occupation. How about gender? Right? These are the most common fields that are left off of CTRs, and it's ridiculous the reasons why. Because you know that that's there, and it's a requirement. If I were not a member, you would get that information, and it'd be there. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's very important that you're actually identifying the person, and you're putting that information in, that you're accurately completing the CTR, and that you're not leaving anything on, you know, like unknown account holder or signature card on file. That's not acceptable. But we want to make sure that you're filling these out correctly because they're getting kicked out. FinCEN will not accept any filings, obviously, with those in which the fields that are marked critical are left blank, but you still must provide information or check unknown if it's a critical field if you don't know. But the unknown box, just so that you know, it supersedes guidance to put NA and XX in certain fields. Do not put NA and do not put XX in certain fields, it's better to put unknown. And so although FinCEN will accept reports with fields, like I said, that aren't marked as critical, FinCEN expects you guys, all of us, to provide the most complete information available to us. That's their expectation, whether the individual fields are deemed critical or not. Fill in those spots. I'm not sure if you guys are doing any shared branching, but who's responsible for those CTRs and SARs, right? Well, FinCEN really doesn't care. They're saying this, yeah, I don't care if you do it, or I don't care if you do it, but somebody do it, and they don't want duplicates. So basically, the arrangement that you have through your co-op services more than likely makes it the other person's responsibility. So if the transaction's happening at your credit union, you would be filing the CTR. If it's happening at the others, then they're filing it and sending you a copy. But you should have a copy of everything that happens so you can match it to your transactions as well. And also, if they're not filing it, right, you want to make sure, if you didn't get a copy in time, if it's a CTR, check within your first 2 weeks, something's happening, you didn't get a copy, why? Hurry up, get it, and if not, fill in the CTR and send it yourself, because it has to be there. That would be a violation. Same thing with SAR reporting. If you can't, if they haven't done it, you need to do it. I know Shannon's run into a lot of that at one of our credit unions, and so she's been backfiling for quite a bit, but it's a lot of work. So just make sure that you have what you have and who's responsible for that reporting there, right? Make sure it's clear within all of your shared cooperatives. So some common CTR filing errors, right? This is what we're finding. Recording the incorrect dollar amounts. So all of the dollar amounts really should be rounded to the next dollar. Incorrectly identifying cashing as a negotiable instrument as a withdrawal in field 27 we're finding. The address box, the address is listed is a PO box. That's, you know, we can't do that. I mean, how is anyone going to knock on a PO box and pull somebody out? This is a law enforcement regulation, right? Failing to check multiple box transactions when applicable, that happens. So these CTRs really need to be looked at. Checking box 2A for the person conducting transactions on own behalf when it's not that, when it's actually happening from a business account. You know, not being specific on the, this is the one I said, right? Not being specific on the retired. Please don't just occupation, retired, no. Retired teacher, retired policeman, retired pole dancer, yay, you know, whatever it is. Put it in, put it in. Want to make sure that that's in, and the driver's license information is incomplete though. These are your members, right? This can't be so. You may come across this, let's just say if you had to take my information because I made a payment, but even at that point, you would be insured to receive documentation for ID. So make sure that you're getting that. There are some exemptions from CTR reporting we know about, and that's basically if you wanted to file for that exemption, it's Form 110 at FinCEN, and it's basically if you had a member that you knew all the time was dealing with cash and you just was tired of it, but you had all the documentation on that person and you know it was a legit business, you can request for the exemption through FinCEN. It's a one-time filing, no renewal, but it is you are required to verify in a sense that that qualification still pertains to that member. And sometimes I think that trying to figure that out is harder than just filling out the CTR, quite frankly. So most of our credit unions don't have any CTR exemptions, and they just go ahead and file on everyone. Automatically exempts, there are some automatically exempt companies, so banks to the extent of their domestic operations. So if you were a smaller credit union taking your money to a bank at the end of the day, you would not be subject to a CTR form. Government departments and agencies and those that exercise government authority. There are some businesses that are not eligible for these exemptions, and they would cover people kind of like us, auditors, external accountants, tax advisors, real estate agents, notaries, and legal professionals are not entitled or are not eligible for the exemption, so you cannot file them. There's just too much stuff that can go on in those groups for money laundering. All right, so the CTR versus the SAR, just quickly. Suspicious activity reporting, we know, is independent completely of CTR reporting requirements. And they may reply regardless of whether it's a $10,000 threshold or not. You know that with SARS, it's more of a $5,000 threshold. In fact, suspicious transactions involving more than $10,000 in cash may also necessitate a CTR filing, right? We know that. But moreover, suspicious activity reporting encompasses transactions generally that don't just involve cash. So there's a lot of going on there. It's not always cash, but you may have to file a CTR as well as a SAR. And something that's coming out of our exams that we're noticing is the importance of SAR reporting as far as the narrative sections and the confidentiality of SAR reporting. Please remember that SARs are our primary source of information to law enforcement officials. So the information that goes on those SARs on the narrative section and in the fields is really, really important. Remember, we're the eyes and ears for the country, right, on all this stuff. And so it's their primary source of information for their investigations. So suspicious activity reports, highly secretive. Both the credit union and any individual involved in improperly disclosing SAR-related information are subject to substantial penalties. SAR reporting requirements are not limited to actual knowledge, so it can be something that you are suspecting or it hasn't actually happened, but it may not even be at your credit union. It could be against your credit union member, but it covers instances where you know, where you suspect, or you have reason to suspect wrongdoing. So those are all encompassed in the SAR requirements. The fact that a SAR has been filed or is even being considered is completely confidential. Please remember that. So policies, procedures, and processes for referring unusual activity from all business lines to the personnel or department responsible for evaluating that information should be in place. That's you, the BSA officer, right? That form that I gave you, that suspicious activity incident report, is a great tool for you to hand to your departments. Okay, here you go. Lending, here's a stack for you, here's a stack for you at the front office. If you encounter any suspicious activity, please write it down and then pass it on to me. Do not talk to anybody else about it, but bring it to me. And so that's kind of what that form is for there. And you want to make sure that you're, you're evaluating that activity. But this will also serve as a process for you to keep and to document your decision-making process, whether you decide to file a SAR or not. Right, because you know that you still need to keep that documentation. And so, and especially now, we're looking at all sorts of things that what is this new normal? Is it fraud now, or is it just the new normal? Like that, I'll keep bringing that payment, back. I'm coming in, even just myself, I'm going into the credit union to make a payment for my elderly parent. At other times, that could have been suspicious, right? You would, what's this woman, it could be elder financial abuse. You could be thinking all sorts of things in your head, right? But right now it's a little bit more logical. Judy and other people and other folks are actually coming in for their elderly parents because of the situation. And so it may not be suspicious as it was before. So keep that in mind and as we adapt to this new normal. There are 4 categories that require filing a SAR, and this is when you would file a suspicious activity report, right? Whenever any known or suspected criminal activity has either been committed or attempted at the credit union, when there's insider abuse, whether you know the subject or not, it doesn't matter. If it has to do with money laundering, you are filing a report. Some reasons for frontline staff to report, and really, and when we get into our training section, it'll reiterate why this is important. So frontline staff would be looking at some forms of structuring possibly, and it's mostly this type of transaction that's reported on CTRs. Also suspicious exchange of currency, check fraud, issues with identification during account opening process merits a SAR. If there's documentation that looks falsified, etc., this is reportable on, this is a SAR reportable situation. Elder financial abuse, big thing, and we have a little bit of that coming up in maybe in a few slides, but just remember, don't file the SAR on the elder, right? You're filing it on the perpetrator of the crime, which could be his daughter or anything, but you want to make sure that you're not filing it on the elder member and you are including him in the narrative section. From a back office perspective, you could be looking at filing SARs for structuring, but SARs would be warranted for fraud, ACH, credit card, debit fraud, pyramid schemes are visible to you guys in the accounting or in the back office, which is why you need to provide separate training or different training. Embezzlement, theft, identity theft, tax fraud, suspicious wire activity, all sorts of fun stuff that happens. And SARs also apply to lending. So you want to make sure that you're getting all that information, and then you've got a stack of these suspicious activity and send reports over to the lending department, right? Make sure that they're paying attention to the customer identification parts of opening accounts, and that they're looking and confirming information on that, because there's a lot of stuff that happens with social security numbers and loan scams, and then you have these members who receive a loan and then fail to make that single first payment. Well, yeah, big red flag, right? Big deal. So we realize, and there's a real big importance in the exam manual, the elder financial exploitation section is really substantial in the sense that there's focus on that. Since 2013, we have reported over 180,000 cases of suspicious activities targeting our older population. That's a total of, that's involving a total of $6 billion worth of funds, right? So these reports indicate that financial exploitation of older adults is actually happening all over the place and is very widespread in the United States. $6 million worth of proof that it's happening, right? These are our parents, this is our money, it's happening. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of that, and we're keep our eyes open. So there are some steps that our financial institutions have been provided in how to prevent and how to detect elder financial exploitation. And basically it's about developing protocols and procedures. You know, you may want to contact them, and there's talk about contacting Adult Protective Services. There's a need to train your employees so that they're aware of what's going on. And also there's an ability to detect financial exploitation through technology. So some of the ATM reports and some of the software that's available out will be able to track unusual ATM card usage, or if there's been, you know, previously inactive accounts or change of addresses or new signers. That type of stuff are things that you need to look at, because that's may be an indication of elder financial exploitation. And also the need to report then, right? So you know that we're going to call Adult Protective Services and get people involved, but then you also need to make sure that you're filing your report, your SAR. And the FinCEN electronic filing system provides a specific category now for elder financial exploitation in an option, and it's in the form field 35. And it's still important though to reference this information in the SAR narrative section without reporting him as the, you know, reporting him or her as the victim, but not as the subject of the SAR. So there's a link that's available there on how to properly file for elder financial exploitation. Do you have any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Gretchen.
Well, you know, the part that you touched, which was really important to me, is reporting on the suspect, which is not on the elder. That's key. But I find that you really starting out and you don't have any information on this person. You may not even know a name.
All right.
So I guess I really don't understand how to go about it. And right now with the COVID, everything's being done at the drive up. There's no in-house lobby, so you can't even get that
The interaction,
the teller talking to the person and say, why, you know, Mrs. Bacon, who's this young man with you today? You know, that kind of thing. So I kind of feel like sometimes there is possibly a reason to file a SARS, but where do you start?
so really good. Thank you for bringing that up. So you are obviously, we're all in that same boat, right? We rely a lot on the communications that we have with our elders, with our members as they're coming in. And as that is kind of becoming obsolete, we need to now rely on some of those reports, some of the electronic information that we have available. So if you have a suspect in your mind, if you have an itch that something is up and wrong, take it a step further yourself, grab that incident report and just start taking some notes. You know, go take a look at their ATM, what's happening, you know, in comparison to a few months ago. You know, take a look at that, and then take a look at, you know, their account. Do you see a lot of transactions where that wasn't the case before? You know, where are the funds going? If you have that kind of suspicion in your mind, it behooves you to go in and do the exploration. In fact, that's what you're supposed to do. And regardless of whether we are able to see our members as much as we want, you have other opportunities or other tools and resources available to help you make that determination. But yes, the suspect or the person that's committing the crime, you know, we may not have information on that person at all. And that's where the unknown has to be checked off on the person that's perpetrating the crime. Not applicable, not, you know, it has to be filled in as unknown. And then they'll know that, you know, it's unknown. But in the narrative, if you think it happens to be a family member, put that in.
Okay.
You know,
Now what about, you know, when something perhaps might have been going on for a month or two, and all of a sudden somebody brings it up to you and says, you know, this really is, you know, something that's been going on for a long time. And on the SARS, it says, you know, when did you start noticing this? You've got 30 days, you've got 60 days, but you really don't have a date.
It's from the time that you decided that it was suspicious. So from the time that it's not when you first got an itch. It's when you had an opportunity to go in and take a look. So now let's just say this person said, oh, this has been going on for a couple of months. You say, okay, now I'm the BSA officer. Let me take a look at it. I will confirm what that is. But you can play with some of those dates because in a sense, not play with them. I don't mean that. But you know that that transactions will happen prior to, and you may not be understanding of all that until you look at enough data, and that may even require a quarter's worth of data to be able to determine whether that was suspicious or not, right? So I wouldn't be too hung up on the, oh, it's been happening for 6 months and then we just found out. It's been happening for 6 months. We just found out. I'm starting to realize it. I'm putting it together. Here's my SAR. Transactions have been happening. It just became evident at 6 months. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because that sometimes is a scary thing when you go, oh, geez,
Yeah.
you know, you've 30 days, but
and
this has been going on for a long time. Is it too late?
No, never too late, never too late. So even if you had to explain in your narrative, oh, this happened last year, you know, I would rather you did that and got spanked for sending it in late than got spanked for not sending it at all and something happened and your institution was used in a way that it shouldn't have been used.
Yeah, thank you, because communication sometimes is the biggest issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're not right there on the front line, and especially now, you don't even travel within the office to pick up, you know, what might be happening.
Oh, I know. Yeah, there's a lot of disconnect. So do your best. Again, this is the new norm. You'll have to use new tools. You have to risk assess everything differently, right? And that's the importance. And that's why this is so cohesive. If you don't have that foundation, the pillars fall apart and the whole program just goes to nothing. So make sure that you have things in place now that just addresses your new normal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so reporting fraud, SARS during COVID. What's that? Okay, so like I said, some perceived red flags may actually be green, like I keep mentioning, family members making payments on behalf. You want to consider a lot of other stuff, but you do want to continue to adhere to your reporting requirements, okay? And there are some real great advisories and links that have come through from FinCEN on some of the scams, and Shannon is going to go through some of those scams a little later. But one of the things that SAR or FinCEN is coming up with or has shared with on this notice in May 18th is they don't want you to include COVID information in your SARS if it's not directly related to COVID. So here's a statement that came from FinCEN. In light of COVID-19 pandemic, some financial institutions have added COVID-19 statements to their disclaimers and using SAR narratives to address COVID-19 impact on their SAR filing abilities. What they're saying is stop that, don't do that. It's not related to the activity, so please don't reference COVID in matters not related to the pandemic that don't need to be filed for corrected reports, etc. So they want to make sure that you're not just funneling everything under COVID and putting that in. All righty. So filing the SAR, nothing new, must be filed 30 days. One big thing here is the don't just file it and forget it thing. You know, we're finding that our credit unions will file a SAR and then just leave it there and then that's it. Well, our examiners are coming back and they saying, well, okay, well, if you filed a SAR, then that person or that entity is now a high risk member. And that member should be put in a bucket for 90 days. Nothing new, it's the 90-day review. And then you have another 30 days to file a SAR if you had continuing activity. But that 90-day bucket is really important. They want to make sure that you're looking at those people because you've already found out that they're suspicious, right? So you want to continue to monitor that activity as a higher risk count, and then you would file a subsequent SAR filing 90, after you've collected an additional 90 days worth of information, and you have 30 days to file that. But even those, single occurrences where that, remember that never is suspicious or anything, but for example, I get one of those FedEx checks that come in the mail and I get so excited and it's fraudulent and I come into the credit union, you file the SAR, that's a one-timer, it's not a big deal. It would be really easy to file and forget me, right? It's not a big deal. But examiners are saying, no, don't just file it. You now need to put her in a bucket and you need to monitor Judy for 90 days and then file on her again if needed. And special attention, real lot of special attention is given to the narrative section. I can't tell you how many exams that I've had from just 2020, all saying the narrative section doesn't address the who, why, where, what, and hows, and certain items that should be included in the SAR narrative. So I have a nice report from FinCEN on how to file your reports, right? It's available on, can you see that? What happened there? There it is. And it's available on the FinCEN website under the BSA, but it's got every field in there and it tells you exactly what you're supposed to be filing and what should not be put into each field. And it's called FinCEN Suspicious Activity Report. And there's also one for CTRs. I suggest that you go to get those links and you save them, and then it gives you an opportunity to look to see what you should be if you have any questions filing in certain fields. All right, if you are interested in FinCEN and you need, something like a sleeping pill at night, go to the FinCEN advisory and start to read. There are tons of stuff on the SARs that have been reported, information on how terrorist cells have come down because of information on a SAR, or how about the real big ones that I really feel really good about is when human trafficking rings come down, right? Because of why? Because of the SAR that we reported. Think about that. I mean, it sends goosebumps up my body because I am really proud of the work that we do, and you should be too. All right, so shared branching, we talked about this, and really important to recognize now that failure to file a SAR for any reason now is actually viewed on exam as a BSA failure, right? So when you look at your reports, one of the things that I look to determine, and I can't look at every area, but I look at checks and I look at wires and your cash report. Your cash report, right? If you're able to look at that in a way that, and what I do is I look at it, 95 over, 9,500 and over, I find those, and I look through them through the months and I see if anything was missed. And that's really the only way that you can tell if you've failed to file any SARs for structuring purposes, but you've got SARs for wires and SARs for all sorts of stuff that you have to look at. And it's important to recognize that if you don't file those SARs, you can be looked at as having a BSA pillar failure. So continuing SARs on the same activity, we know we've talked a little bit about that, but we must comply and we must keep reporting until the activity stops. If it stops, then it stops, right? But just because we haven't received any response from FinCEN doesn't mean we stop reporting. If the activity continues, we have to continue. There's no requirement to automatically close accounts when we have, SARs or anything like that. In fact, sometimes if you were to contact FinCEN, or if there was an issue, they may ask you to keep that account open just so that you can continue to monitor what's going on in that. But you do have, some concerns. You want to consider notifying law enforcement before you do close that account if you are uncomfortable, if it's too risky, and ask for their thoughts on that. All right, and you would file, when you file a SAR, you are required obviously to maintain a copy of that and any supporting documentation for a period of 5 years. And if you were requested by FinCEN or any other appropriate law enforcement or supervisory agency, you would have to provide them that documentation as well. And so what constitutes supporting documentation? It's anything and everything that you use to assist you in making that determination that that activity required a SAR filing. Okay, so if you used currency reports, if you use wire logs, if you use anything you use, that's the supporting documentation. It's important also to note that there's no legal process that's required for disclosure of supporting documentation. But the Financial Privacy Act actually prohibits institutions from disclosing customers' financial records to government agencies without service of legal process, but it does not apply here to SARs. And members to notice an opportunity to challenge that disclosure does not exist, okay, for SARs. Exactly. So if FinCEN were to ask you for something, you provide it. In writing, please make sure that you get what you do. Don't hand anything out unless you got official documentation and it looks real, and you maybe talk to your league and see if it's actual. I mean, it's just enough, not that it isn't actual, but you want to make sure that, hey, get them used to providing you things in real document form, just like they expect you to, right? I mean, you want to cover your butt too. So put in your files. I want a document with the Financial Enforcement Network seal on it that says I have to do this before I do this. Okay, good. So there's an understanding. There's no minimum number of SARs that are expected to be filed by our credit unions. It's not the policy of FinCEN or other agencies to draw conclusions based solely on these SAR filings. But keep in mind this. If you are a large credit union or any other credit union, if you haven't filed SARs, there's a question as to why, right? So when I walk into a credit union and we're doing an audit and there are no SARs filed, I want to know everything about that credit union now. Yeah, because okay, what are you monitoring? Are you monitoring everything correctly? Because when there isn't a SAR, it just makes me feel like there's nothing that's being watched. And so your examiners may have that same impression as well. So if there's a large discrepancy between you and your peers, your examiners may dive into that BSA program a little bit further to ensure that you're actually reviewing your transactions and you're capturing information that you should be. Any questions regarding suspicious activity that require immediate attention? There's a telephone number. You can call these numbers, but you can notify law enforcement authorities in addition to filing the SAR of anything that you feel can't wait. All right.
That was my question. This is Gretchen again.
Yep.
That if you've done a SARS on somebody or you're monitoring and the local law enforcement comes in to talk to somebody regarding something that happened on the same person, we more or less have followed the protocol that they need subpoena or et cetera to get information. What is the, as far as to talk to them, that you might get more information from them or you're helping them? Can you do that? Or, are you breaking the confidentiality?
No, we'll talk a little bit about, I have, I think, a slide or two coming up, but you can, I think it's coming up, sharing information. So let's see where that is. Gretchen, it's like 2 slides from here, but we'll address exactly that. Okay.
All right.
So some useful information to provide to your staff to help them become aware of possible suspicious activity. look at the red flags that's in Appendix F of the exam manual. There are tons of appendices there, and red flags are available based on position. Red flags for tellers, red flags for back office personnel, just like I did, the requirements for training, red flags for you guys to be aware of, okay? I don't know where I am, let's see. And then also, as I mentioned, you do need to make sure that you identify the no, or that you've documented correctly your no file SAR decision and why you were possibly thinking of that SAR, and who first raised the possibility, information that you relied upon, ultimate determination on whether you decided to file or not, whether your ongoing monitoring is going to still happen, whatever you decide with all of this particular incidents. Here, communications with law enforcement officials, you want to make sure that you're putting that all in that suspicious activity incident report and keeping it. It's part of your files, and that is also confidential, right? So you want to make sure that you keep that together. Here it is. It's there, and then there's more to it. So this is just one page, but the actual form has more fields for you to fill in. All right, sharing SARs and SAR information. Except where such disclosures as requested by FinCEN or an appropriate law enforcement or a supervisory agent comes into place. You as a credit union will not provide any information that would disclose that a SAR has been prepared, filed, or anything else, right, or considered. And you can cite this 31 CFR 1020, et cetera, for your refusal to provide information on SARs. You can't even say, oh yeah, that's here, but I can't talk to you about it. No, you can even say that. That's acknowledging that a SAR exists, right? Don't do that. The credit union will notify FinCEN and NCUA if you do receive any requests. And you, as a volunteer or employee, you will be protected from liability for disclosures because you are provided a safe harbor through SARs, okay? And for failure to disclose the fact that such a report has been filed. So you don't need to worry about that. Now, I know, Gretchen, your question had to do with sharing SARs and information with others. So hopefully one of these slides will deal with it. But if it doesn't, ask me again at the end. SARs are confidential. You will only disclose SARs to fulfill your responsibilities consistent with BSA. Again, to law enforcement agencies, regulators, et cetera, and to your committee members as outlined by your policy too, okay? You will not provide information or notification that a transaction has been reported, even if that person's on that SAR. No one, I mean, obviously, if that person's on that SAR, but you want to make sure that you are taking all that information down. You can also share a SAR with your affiliates. Okay, and I know that your privacy statement has room for that little checkoff. You are able to share with your affiliates certain information that's private, but it's also, you know, but that's provided that your affiliate is also subject to that SAR type of regulation if they're also subject to keeping that confidential. But you will ensure that your affiliates keep information confidential as well. So you won't share any information that you have reason to believe that information may be disclosed to somebody else that's involved in suspicious activity. So you will have to be cautious about what you share, but it's a matter of documenting it and making sure that it's appropriate. Now, officials, employees, and agents, whether subpoenaed or otherwise requested to disclose a SAR or the information contained within it, must decline to produce the SAR or to provide any information at all that would disclose that a SAR was prepared or filed, and then notify FinCEN of your request. I think that's your question, right, Gretchen?
Well, I guess there was a particular incident that I, as the BSA officer, would file a SARS, but my supervisor was approached by law enforcement concerning this person.
Mm-hmm.
So they got into, you know, conversation about what he did or didn't do. You know, they didn't talk about whether a SARS or anything else was filed or, you know, what he was doing or this or that, but I wasn't in on the conversation, so I wasn't, it was all hearsay.
So here, just quickly, a couple of things that I'm noticing. Yep. First of all, You weren't provided the authority that you were supposed to be provided as a BSA officer because a law enforcement official came in to talk to somebody in a department that did not go directly to you. You got to change that somewhere, that chain of command. That law enforcement official should have gone directly to you. That's the way it should be set up so that it goes to the appropriate personnel that would handle it. You know what you can disclose and what you can't disclose versus that other person. Right, and so it's important that you change that around. But if they were talking about transactions, or they were talking about stuff, were they talking about an investigation? Was there an investigation open? Right, if there was an investigation open, then you're talking within the realm of that, and you're in the scope of that. Then okay, if that person came in and just started talking, and there wasn't an investigation that had been part of that, then I think that it would be wrong for them to talk about anything. If you have an official subpoena or you have an official investigation that started, then you know what to reply with. It's official and you're going to let FinCEN know. But conversations like that should not be happening outside of you so that you are aware of what's actually being talked about. Okay, that's you remember you're those civil fine penalties and the money penalties that are coming out that are being given to individuals are exactly this, to individual BSA officers for not knowing what they should have known, for not doing what they should have known. Remember, that BSA officer, that pillar was the first one that we talked about because that's the importance of it. So make sure that you are not letting that happen.
Thank you.
Come to you first, and you can let them know everything, right? Because it's an investigation, but you don't even know what those terms are. You don't even know the investigation yet. Why are they asking you?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk really quickly about cash sales. And I know it's on the hour. My thought to you, I will ask you, we're on slide 126. Do you want to just keep going or do you want to stop? All right, I have a couple more slides here and then you can tell me what you want to do. Maybe you can type it into the chat and Christine will let me know.
Yep, we had Brian saying, keep going.
Hey, Brian. That's my guy. All right, we're going to keep going just because Brian said so. All right, so financial institutions on the sale of cash sales of monetary instruments, you know, we're not allowed to sell or distribute or to give. So don't let the sell kind of hit you and leave it there because we just give our cashier's checks out. Credit union checks, cashier's checks, money orders, traveler's checks for amounts that are within $3,000 and $10,000 unless you first make record of that sale. The monetary instrument log, it's a record keeping requirement, right? Most of our credit unions have policies in place that require our credit unions to deposit cash into their accounts first. So that log or that kind of check or transaction is already captured in your 3 to 10 cash reports or any other cash reports that you're already doing. So for the matter of keeping record of your monetary instruments, I would do it more so from a transaction monitoring standpoint, more so than I would to make sure, you know, that I'm capturing all the cash, because that cash, again, is picked up in the accounts on those cash reports. But who and how many, that kind of thing is more of my interest. And so that would come into the transaction monitoring. All right, so you are required to, for monetary instruments, for the cashier's checks, et cetera, you must keep record of the member's name, all of these things, and the reason for the check, et cetera, and OFAC verification. Cashier's checks made out to third parties, those that are made out to Macy's, Northeast Utilities, all those types of things still require OFAC verification, okay? But remember that this is a risk-based program and your risk and your focus will have to be, or your focus has to be, you have to be focused on the risks that are most prominent at your credit union. If Macy's and Northeast Utilities does not pose that same type of risk, then maybe you decide that these companies don't go through that OFAC check, or maybe checks under $100 don't go through that OFAC check. Work it, figure it out how you can monitor those transactions based on your opportunity with staff and all that kind of stuff, and your availability, you know, what you have resources for. You can't do what you can't do. So limit and focus where you need to your higher risk products. Wire service is the same thing. You know, it's a record keeping requirement for the most part. But again, most of our credit unions have that policy that require members to deposit their cash into their account, but you do want to understand the reason for that wire and you want to get this information. So if you are able to get this information, in a form that is easily manipulated, then we're golden. Because what we're really looking for, let's just say you do this for your wires, you do this for your cashiers, right? You want to look at them. Don't place one wire on top of another. It serves you no purpose other than a record for that record keeping. But hey, what a notion. BSA is all about suspicious activity, and I'm supposed to be looking out for it. So where do I look for it? I'm looking for it in all of my services and products and everything. My wires is one of them. I'm going to sort by originator, and I'm going to look at what pops up. I'm going to then sort by beneficiary, and I'm going to see what pops up. And if anything is in there that's suspicious, then I'm going to report that, right? So when I said, you know, are you reporting all suspicious activities? It's almost impossible to figure out everything. But if you're looking at all your services and products in this way, then you're able to determine. But again, your wire log, you know, you don't want 1 month's worth of wires or 1 month's worth of checks. You need a quarter. You need to be able to see how many times Judy came in the past 3 months and bought checks or had checks and who they're made out to. Oh, and isn't it funny that she's making them out to board members? Why? You know, because you'll see that, right? Or a board member is issuing checks to employees or issuing checks to whatever, but it's there and it's all visible in your logs, your cashier's checks through your ledger. Look at your cashier's ledger. Pull that out, get it into an Excel format from a PDF file you can convert to Excel, manipulate that data from by sender and by beneficiary. You'll see Judy makes alimony payments and they're on time. She skipped May, there it is in June, double payment. Those have a business reason, right? And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for things to have an explanation. And if you can't find it, that's suspicious. So you would look for payment orders based on unexplained sudden wire activity. How about large number of transfers, you know, multiple wires offshore, no apparent business reason. These are high risk things, and that's what you're looking for. Large frequent wires from a wire standpoint, but you could be doing this also for your checks. And again, I suggest that if you only have a few services, wires and checks are primarily the bigger things, and I know that there are other things, but do look at them, right? Do look at these things. All righty, the Patriot Act. I don't know where I am as far as who's supposed to be doing what, but I think I'm still going, right, Shannon? All right, well, the Patriot Act is information sharing, Section 314A and Section 314B of the Patriot Act, I guess, like I just said, are about information sharing. Section 314A is a list, is a highly sensitive and confidential list of persons that are subject to law enforcement investigations. They haven't necessarily been convicted of any crimes, but you should have a contact person at your credit union to respond to these requests. So that's the reason these people are on a hot list, so to speak. Your credit union will receive information from FinCEN every 2 weeks, and then your credit union has 2 weeks to research your records against that, and you must maintain evidence of compliance and report any matches to FinCEN. These, again, this is a sensitive, confidential list, so you cannot disclose any of these FinCEN requests to your member, to anyone. So, you know, most of our credit unions get onto the SISS FinCEN website page, they log on, and I'm able to see you logged on, and then you downloaded the information and you uploaded it into your system and your core, or whoever you have doing that scrub. All of that is evidence of compliance. Okay, make sure you keep that to show that you've gone through that. And we're looking for timely filings of those 314As, because when we do go onto the, as far as an examiner or an auditor goes onto the website, and you pull those reports and they'll ask you for those reports, one of the first things that we look for is, okay, well, you get them every 2 weeks, and are you doing them every 2 weeks? Or are you doing 2 lists at the end of the month? And that's one of the things that happens a lot. And we find that, and that's a violation. You cannot do 2 lists at the end of the month, even if you ran out of time. On occasion, it's acceptable, but if they found that to happen, then that's not what you're going to, then you would get dinged on that. So information 314B, on the other hand, is about sharing information with other financial institutions for the sole purpose, however, of detecting and reporting terrorist activity and money laundering, terrorist financing, all that kind of stuff, right? An annual notice would be filed with FinCEN. you get your 314 letter in the mail, in your email, you're able to share your information and discuss SAR related information with other financial institutions. I can't tell you how many SARs Shannon and I have read that includes information about other financial institutions. And then when we ask for the section 314B to ensure that they've got a safe harbor, because that's what section 314B does. It provides a safe harbor between institutions, whether it's there, our institutions aren't filing or requesting that annual notice from FinCEN, and there's no reason not to. It's just a list, you put yourself on it, and it provides you a safe harbor. So if you have opportunity, go to the FinCEN website and sign yourself up, you'll get a letter. You must verify that the other institution is also on that list prior to sharing information. All right, going into the next pillar, it's training, and we've got Shannon. And yes, I will approve and give you remote control of my screen. I hate giving up control, but okay, go.
Okay, so going into training, this is an important portion of your pillar. So training is required for employees and volunteers, right? Training should be documented in record of your training materials, attendees, and dates should be maintained, right? Because you want to be able to show your examiners that you are training on accurate and correct information. Training materials should cover BSA regulatory requirements, supervisory guidance, and the bank's internal BSA AML policies, procedures, and processes. And an overview of the purposes of BSA and its regulatory requirements are typically provided to new staff during employee orientation or thereafter, right? So if you're a new employee, they're going to get a broad overview of the BSA AML regulatory requirements. Training should be tailored to each individual's specific responsibilities, as we discussed earlier. For example, tellers should focus on large currency transactions or suspicious activities because they're the front lines for that. Lending personnel should provide examples involving money laundering through lending arrangements. You want to make sure that it's tailored appropriately. As discussed earlier, the board of directors should receive foundational training on the BSA, since they are actually responsible for the overall, but they also need updated training for any type of new developments in the BSA program or any type of regulatory changes. And they need to be able to have that sufficient understanding of the bank's risk profile and BSA regulatory requirements in order to provide that accurate oversight, right? Training requirements. As far as timing is concerned, periodic training should be incorporated into your program to reflect, again, any of those updates. And that's not just for board, that's for any of your appropriate personnel, anyone that has a hand in BSA AML programs. You want to make sure that the board of directors are updated, as I said, especially with things that are going on in COVID, right? So many things have changed. There've been so many updates that have come out. We need to make sure that everyone is aware, an overall view of what's changed. For instance, the revisions to the BSA AML exam, they're changing their focus. Not that it's never been there, but they're focusing on different items, right? So your board needs to be aware of what are the focuses, the COVID-19 pandemic related scams, which I'm going to get into in a little bit. These areas we're finding may be scrutinized. So you want to make sure that you're following the correct due diligence when it comes to these items. You're going to want to tailor your training to the unique and often remote environment, right? Everyone's working remotely now. We're doing half remote, half in branch. You need to update the board to ensure their BSA knowledge remains sharp and it's critical. These would be great additions to add to your 2021 training. In my screen, I'm clicking. There we go. Below, we're going to list some questions that BSA offers may want to keep in mind when developing the board training. You want to know, are you doing the right things? Are you doing them well? How do you compare to others in your area? As Judy was saying, you know, if you have another institution that, you know, tends to be, you know, finding more SARs or CTRs than others than you are, you know, are you find that another institution, you're looking into online banking. This institution asks, you know, 14 new account questions before you're enrolled, and yours just says what's your name, address, and date of birth, right? You want to make sure you guys are on the same page. Are we sufficient and competent and effective? Is your program effective? Are you accurately identifying suspicious activity? Are your programs properly positioned? Are you devoting resources and staffing to those areas that are of greatest risk, right? This goes back to your risk assessment. You know, those higher areas of risk need to be a top priority. Are you assessing those correctly and adequately? Are we outsourcing and insourcing the right processes in line with competencies and economies? Are we properly managing and accountable in all cases, right? You want to make sure that you're validating, you know, should third-party vendors be used for OFAC? You guys have a lot on your plate, right? If things are not being done in a timely manner, you want to make sure that you're reviewing to make sure things are being done accordingly.
And just really quickly, just to let you know, when you're developing your training for your board, these are questions that you should be asking yourself to make sure that you're addressing your board. You're telling them how you're doing in all these things, right? You want to make sure that you're training them on all of these things, and you're training them on the right questions that they should be asking you later on as they get more familiar with their position, if they're not. But you know, in general, this is what you want to keep in mind as far as what you give them to train them so that they learn how to ask questions as well.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys, oh, sorry, did you guys see, or I just had to step out for a second. There was a question from Brian.
No.
Okay,
Sorry.
Annual BSA training has been central to our program, and this includes all official bodies. So hearing that annual training is not required is big news. It would be most helpful if you had a document handout that could summarize changes and current priorities for BSA. Can you provide this?
Yeah, and we have provided the links to all of that in this document. So Brian, every link, including the updates, the focus, that's the 41-page update that's included in the link on one of the prior pages, but I'll get that information to you separately. But all the links to all of this, everything we talk about is included in here. And no, it's not that don't change your processes because of what you hear really quickly here. So when they say annual training is not a requirement, they're talking about the periodic thing. You know, they're not talking about it's not that it's every 12 months or every 18 months or every 2 years. That's what they're saying. Annual training is still required, but maybe what they're trying to say is it's not needed to be done because it's an annual event. It's needing to be done because things have changed, because there's been a new risk assessment, so it may be more frequent than once a year, quite frankly, but at a minimum, to keep things safe, you want to have annual training because that annual training will encompass at least what's happened in that year. And then in addition, you enhance it and you pepper it with the things that are happening that are outside the scope of what the year really brought in, but you want to make sure that you're getting all those supervisory guidances in and anything that may be happening because of COVID or those types of things. That's what you need to make sure you're training your board on so that they are aware of. But Brian, I wouldn't take that annual requirement out of there, even because your board is responsible for this program, right?
And I have seen institutions where they have not provided annual training. It was just over 2 years, and it was a recommendation that the board do be trained on an annual basis. So even though it's not required, they are recommending it, and I have seen that. So I do want to stress that.
Yeah.
Right.
So most of our examiners will fall on the 12 to 18 month period, as 18 months being at the most that they'll do anything for. And that's if you've got really great CAMEL ratings, etc. All right. So we'll let you keep going then.
Yeah, and as and again, this is a nice thing that you would want to review in pages 32 to 34 of the exam manual update. There's some training points. Training should cover BSA requirements, the bank's internal policies, training for the board and senior management. So I would definitely take a look in those resources, and we have them listed here.
All right. I think I'm independent testing, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's me?
Yeah.
I thought I had it. All right. So then, all right. So, all right. The next pillar, independent testing, we're going to look at audits and examiner expectations, right? So we know that our exam, or were you doing this, Shannon?
It doesn't matter.
I'll keep going. Our examiners, but I know Shannon has got a lot of experience with examiner expectations.
I might jump in a bit.
She's at one of our largest institutions in Connecticut, and she has been the backbone for the contact person for examiners during their state and NCUA exams and other audits. So I want her perspective in here. But what they're expecting, they want to make sure that your policies are updated and everything is board approved, right? We're looking for these things. They're looking for these things. Where are the documents? Where does it say that in your board minutes? Your procedures, make sure that everything you do, right? So you've got a product, you've got a risk assessment for that product, and you've got a procedure for that product. Everything goes like that. For every service, product, procedure, you've got a risk, and you've got every service product and et cetera, you've got a risk assessment and a procedure based on that, and it falls within your policy. So you want to make sure that all those are in line with your policies, and also system access.
Yeah, we have seen system access. If you terminate an employee, you want to make sure that you are terminating access to any type of, FinCEN, your BSA, your 314A. They are looking at system accesses in the audits.
Thank you. Yeah. So really important stuff there. And I'll keep going there. Timeliness, I guess, making sure that your CTRs are filed within that 15-day, the 30 days and 90 days for the SARs, and those 2 weeks for the 314As that we looked at. They're looking to ensure the effectiveness of your credit union's risk assessment. Remember, it's the foundation, and making sure that everything all works together. And I think that is what the focus of the examiner or the exam manual is now. It's not that anything has changed so much. It's now we want to make sure that you are looking at your risks, and it's all encompassed and it's all working together so that there's an effective program. All righty. Go ahead, Shannon. I know.
Documentation is huge. It is key. They're going to ask for documents, and if they want to know why you didn't do something, it needs to be there and it needs to be documented. So as Judy was talking about the reasons a SAR was not filed, if you file an initial SAR and then after the 90 days you do a review and you decide not to file a follow-up SAR, you need to document your reasoning behind it, okay? And they will be asking for that documentation. Your member risk rating changes. If you decide to change a member's risk rating from high to moderate or even to low, you need to document the reasons why, and also include any type of material, okay? So if you have any type of checks or any type of internet searches or anything like that, make sure you keep that in that file. You shouldn't have any CIP exceptions, but if you do for any reason, you need to make sure you document as to why you accepted that CIP exception. And maintaining a tracking list from any prior audit findings. They're looking again for, and I discussed this earlier, they're looking again for that tracking. You know, this was identified. This is how we intend to rectify the situation. This is our target date. We've reached that date. Did we hit it? Did we miss it? Make sure you document that.
Yeah, and I know that we've gotten some of our credit unions have been called out because past exam expectations or past exams, resolutions, things that needed to be addressed weren't addressed in the new or in the current audit. So even your auditor will get dinged if they don't have the right information on there. So some important points about independent testing have been outlined in the exam manual on pages 24 through 28. And it talks about, you know, the independence of the BSA function and also testing and a conclusion statement. So what they're trying to do here is give examiners the platform or the template, right? And it also gives us the template to hold them accountable to, because, you know, if there isn't an independent testing conclusion statement on our exam or on the audit, we need to ask why, you know, and that kind of thing. You also need to make sure that we're reporting all those findings to the board. And also, if you're not employing outside auditors or consultants, and you don't have an internal audit department, you can still comply by using qualified bank staff to provide you with the audit, provided they're not involved with the BSA function. So that's why the independence has to be there, and you have to make sure that that happens. And also, there is an opportunity for us to you know, making sure that there's no conflict of interest. But there is an opportunity for us to share. I think there's a FinCEN guidance that allows credit unions to share resources. So if there are two credit unions, let's just say, that are similar in size and shape and all that kind of stuff, you can serve as each other's BSA auditor in a sense. But there is stuff that you have to follow, and if you are doing that, just reach out to me or Shannon, and we'll give you the guidance that goes along with that, so that you are doing it independently and meeting the requirements of independent testing. So we know that there's no regulatory requirement for the testing and the frequency. Again, everything is the requirement, but independent testing should be commensurate to your credit union, right, and your risk. So, and then Brian, getting to that, that's the reason why they don't necessarily say, oh, it's mandatory every year or every 2 years, you know, because everyone is different, and you may need more than just once a year training. It depends, but at least once a year would be my recommendation. And the same thing with your independent testing, every 12 to 18 months. And or if there is any significant change, like if you had a merger at your credit union, you might want to consider having an audit. You want, before you merge, also want to make sure that your credit unions that you're merging with had their audits, so that you know what you're getting yourself into, because you will be assuming those liabilities there as well. So, you know, it's all risk-based, and it's all dependent upon everything that you have within your risk profile. So we want to make sure that they're taking all this stuff into consideration, and that you comply, and that your overall processes of identifying and reporting suspicious activity is adequate. And they're going to make sure that that's an independent thing, and it's done through an appropriate auditor that has experience, and or another credit union that has experience.
And on a larger scale, for the credit unions that are using the automated money laundering and BSA programs, you do want to look into getting those independently tested, as far as how your risk ratings are, and the actual risk rating is in that that form itself, right? Because they want to make sure that all the risks are being identified, that keywords are pulling up in those automated systems. And we have noticed that through the NCUA examiners, they're looking to make sure that your BSA AML automated systems are being tested. So just keep that in mind too.
And that's the first point there, is your technology resources and your sources. Make sure that you're and there's another slide, there are a few slides on actually validating those models and those systems. And that's a requirement now too. So we want to make sure that that's all taken care of, and they're looking at training, and they're looking at management, they're looking at everything, and they're looking at your model validation. And this is what Shannon will go into, because she's got experience with all of this stuff, and that we'll let her share that. I think I may have control though, so I'll just pop it all up for you now.
Yeah. So in the model validation, it does need to be required by an independent third party, and there are different places out there that you can hire to come in, and they will do an overview of your system. Again, because what they're looking for is making sure that your reports translate properly, right? They're making sure that the documents and role responsibilities are being accurately reported, right? You need to be able to understand the data. The data that flows through your system needs to be able to map to secure sources. So make sure that you're just doing it accurately. Right. Well, model validation is required periodically. A data integrity review may be warranted more frequently, right? At least annually, particularly if an institution has new transaction codes, conversion of an integrated system, mergers or acquisitions, as Judy was saying. Those are all red flags, right? To make sure that your system is still up and running properly.
Right, and then testing those parameters, making sure that the parameters are correct. That's really important. You know, when we start looking at reports, you want to make sure that those validating programs are actually kicking out the right information, right? That you've got enough parameters set within the scope of the programs to give you that information. So really quickly, as a form of just and I think I may have a slide later, but there was one institution, I think it was US Bank, that was fined for putting a cap on one of these reporting requirements because they couldn't handle the volume. So let's just say you have a Verifin program that has the red flags kicked in and you've got all the, you know, the parameters set to kick out at however, whatever you have set in there. And then you realize you're getting too many red flags and you can't handle them. And so what do? You go back into the system and you put a cap on it. You can't do that. Right, that's a violation. This person got a $450,000 civil penalty fine individually because they should have known better, right? And it boiled down to, and I'll bring it back on the slide, but it boiled down to they put a cap on the reporting mechanism because they could not, and they did not want to hire any more employees. Remember, we talked about it not being, you know, that BSA should be separate and independent from resources or from money or expense. Well, in a sense, you have to have resources available to you. You can't decide BSA will not fit into my program because it's too expensive and I can't hire the right person. That you will absolutely get a violation for, not only your credit union, but you personally, because you should have known better. Remember that, you should have known better factor. And she keeps going into, you know, making sure that all that statistical analysis is actually reviewed and it's useful. Make sure that the information that you're getting from these reports is useful. And then you're looking at it. Because instead of doing it manually, you're saying, I'm relying on this model here to give me the information that I need. So now I'm going to look at that and I'm going to report on that. But you want to make sure that those model validations around your BSA program are happening, and it's expected now by your examiners if you're that big and you have that in place. So please make sure that you provide all the right ingredients for the basis of a strong and sound BSA program. Some things that you need to remember when you're doing that, though, that, you know, it's about, you know, the information that you put in, the processing, the reporting, and the governance component on that. And then here was my little capping alert, like remember that enforcement action there was that I just mentioned. And so you don't want to do things so that they're only to your benefit. The benefit of this is for the whole BSA system, not to make your job easier. I'm sorry. So I want to just really quickly, you know, all the stuff that's coming out on this for the risk-based and you know, the risk assessments and risk-focused BSA, AML supervision and all this guidance. What they're really saying, what we're getting from examiners is this: hey, we're going to try to really leverage I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. We're going to try to leverage the information that you are providing us, right? We really are kind of busy and there's a lot of stuff that we're looking at. So when we can, we will leverage the available information. So they will take your BSA audit, provided that the BSA audit is comprehensive and they like it. And I've seen where BSA audits have been turned down and NCUA says, no, it's not a sufficient audit, you need to get another one. Right? So they will say that they will use that and they will skip those things in a sense, and they will rely on those independent testings and audits and analysis that have been conducted in previous examinations. And so they'll do that. That's a good thing, which means you want to make sure you have someone that's competent doing those audits, because you don't want that getting turned down. They'll also contact you between examinations or prior to finalizing your examinations, just to make sure they got everything right. So they're really trying to work with you, and they're really trying to be transparent. I think that that's the conclusion that we've made, is that, you know, they're really focused on this BSA, you know, thing, but they're focused on your unique profile. And when they're examining you, they're going to keep that in mind, and they're going to allow for, you know, everything that's happened during COVID, and they'll use as much as they can from what's available to them. But please, for yourselves, just, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's been going on. Document your stuff. Like if you had to do those loans for, you know, for forbearance or anything else that in any, not just BSA, but segregate what you did for BSA or for anything for COVID, so that it's really easy to find, you know, those loans that were under forbearance. They're all in the red folders or whatever it is, but try to make it easy for yourself and your examiner so that they know you had a good handle on what was going on. Some exam findings that we have that we've seen, some sightings for, and there have been penalties for not properly having internal controls. Some of common 2020 finding was a lack of adequate internal controls. For everything that you do, there is a risk assessment, but there's a policy, there's a risk assessment, and there's a procedure, because you've identified risk and then there's a procedure to mitigate it. Every single thing you do, and you have to have a written procedure. And the importance of this is not just because you don't want it to come out in a finding. The importance of your written procedures is to have it there as a backup, because God forbid something happened to you and you leave your credit union stranded without your written procedures. How do you function? So you want to make sure that that's all taken care of. And then also, one thing that we noticed is there's no quality control happening for CTRs and SARs that are going out. So they're noticing that as well. So a lot of CTRs and SARs are coming back for not being properly written, but what they're really seeing is that there's no quality control. Yeah, but see, it's much larger. It's not that your CTRs and SARs aren't being filed correctly. It's more so that you don't have the internal controls. And so that's what they're looking at there. Some other kind of findings around suspicious activity reporting, insufficient identification or alert of unusual activity. Technology, having all that information. There's no formal or documented SAR decision-making process. So, hey, that form that we just provided you might be that documented process that you need. With a few more, you know, lines there. This is what we do if this is, but that's your process there. No documented escalation criteria for closing accounts, again, and notifying law enforcement officials. This form will serve that. If you can use that or something similar to your that should make them happy. No processes for continuing SARs. Transaction types aren't being monitored. Reports, alerts aren't being reviewed. What's the point? Documentation is not included in the date review. There's all sorts of stuff that's happening that's really kind of sloppy. And quite frankly, what it is, it's lazy, right? And so if we're not filling in this information, there's no reason. We have this. These are our members, right? And they have account information. And if we didn't, and we don't have that account information, oof, why? Then it goes back to the due diligence pillar. That's where your problem is. It's not with the reporting, it's with your due diligence, because you didn't have the information. You should have gotten it there. All plays together. Deficient narrative. There is information on the, and big one too, on the FinCEN website, there's a webinar on how to write, and also on that form, on that SAR, suspicious activity reports, there's information on there on how to properly write a narrative, what should be included. Let's spend some time on that, especially if you've got new people going into that and you're not answering all those questions on the narrative. And anyway, and then should be the documentation that they're being provided is not robust enough, is what they're saying, and it should be as robust as the SAR narrative, so that you have documentation that you know is relevant. And then again, untimely filing of SARs and lack of continuing SARs is being seen a lot. So you know that 90-day review is not happening. Big focus there. Make sure that that's happening, and you're seeing those buckets. Actually, it's like popping in a bucket. And also disclosing SAR related information. Did you guys? You knew well. Was it Wells Fargo that happened a few months ago, where they had And I've got so much information coming in my head, but maybe somebody will trigger the actual thought where Bank of America, Wells Fargo, I think, got fined because all of the suspicious activity report had come out, right? And oh God, somebody remind me what it was, please. But this was just a couple of months ago. And basically, it wasn't about the suspicious activity, right? It was more so that the suspicious activity got released. So where these banks may get fined, it's not necessarily that the SAR was bad or something. It's more so that, oh, wait a second, how did you allow for that information to get out, right? Keep your stuff tight. Independent testing, some issues with that. BSA officers being involved in the audit process, can't do that. Tracking and correcting findings, big. We know that even on the audits, they want to see your past audit and your corrective methods and what did you do and how did you correct. Testing, and again, your automated systems and the succession planning of your BSA officer and backup. They talk about training, where better board of director training is needed, more stuff there, it should be more comprehensive. They talk about it being in person because the board has fiduciary responsibilities to the institution and they need to understand the BSA to provide oversight and also to buy into the culture of compliance, which, you know, goes down. So if they're not there, obviously it's not going to happen, but the training is one of the areas where we've been cited. You know, training again, policies and procedures again, and the different types of training that should be for different different personnel. But customer due diligence and enhanced diligence, onboarding deficiencies, you know, this rate risking is really big. It's popped up here on my screen here. Do that. Shannon, maybe you can add a little bit to that because I know you've been doing a lot with that rate risking and not gathering enough information to do that.
That comes back to your member due diligence and your enhanced due diligence, asking those initial questions in the first step. What is your intentions for this account? In rating them appropriately. A business account is going to be more of a risk than a personal account just off the bat, right? So you need to make sure that you are understanding that and rating them at the time of account opening. Auditors are looking to see whether you're doing it and how you're coming about it.
And then what does that mean? If you put them in bucket 2 for medium risk, what does it mean? Bucket 2 means that they require a review every 2 weeks. Bucket 3 means every week. Whatever that is, you know that you have different buckets for different risks. Make sure that that's just one of the things that they're coming out of and we're trying to address now. And unreliable risk rating. Get that. What is it? Determine what medium means. Determine what low means. Determine what high means, right? And make sure that you are able to document and show consistency. Unusual activity and variances from expected activity is not properly analyzed. So really the point here we're making is that they're really looking at how you're interrelating, you know, how you're doing your risk rating, how you're using that risk in your program, how you're taking that risk and developing procedures and processes. It's all about the risk-based thing. And again, can't stress, look at that manual. It's how we prepare. It's how we know what they're looking for so that we can, you know, tidy our home up before they come in.
And Steve sent a link in the chat box for everybody that talked about that bank that leaked out all of the...
Yeah, I have it here. Which one is it? What do I have? I think it was Wachovia now that I look at it. It was actually Wachovia Bank got hit with a $450,000 civil money penalty on the chief operational risk officer, right? And he got hit even harder than the US bank violation that had happened just earlier because FinCEN said Wachovia Bank had been subject to regulatory actions that were similar to what US Bank did, that it only happened a few months. So they should have known better. So they got dinged on the should have known. So when I say you guys, you should know, as a BSA officer, make sure you know. You should know. There are certain things that you should know. And we're trying to get that to you, but your manual information here and everything else, and then everything else that you pile on top of that hat. We know you have a lot to do. What was that? OFAC scanning, you know, interdiction systems. Oh, take a look at your interdiction systems, make sure that they're doing it, you know, that you're looking at your OFAC reviews, that their parameters are set correctly, that kind of stuff. And your risk assessment is identifying any international transactions and any PEPs and anything like that as well. All right. I don't know where we are with our yous and me's and everything, but
I want to go through OFAC quickly. I think you can do it a lot faster than I
I
can.
can do it quickly. Okay, we'll go through OFAC. OFAC is a division of the U.S. Treasury Department. You know that they administer and enforce those economic and trade sanctions against those targeted countries that we shouldn't be doing business with. It's basically your naughty list, and we don't do business with them. But they do have a compliance program of their own, and we put it together with the BSA program because it works really nice. Okay. New accounts must be OFAC verified before the first transaction, hopefully within the first 24 hours. All new member accounts must be, all member accounts must be verified periodically against that OFAC list. Why? Because today, when I opened my account, I wasn't a terrorist, right? But tomorrow, I may have a change of heart, and I may just use all of the funds in my account to go buy boots for those people that are fighting us, right? Because I just had a change of heart. So you need to make sure that your membership continues to stay clean. And OFAC may require you to freeze or block payments of transactions, but they may actually, and some may be having to reject it and have to be rejected. But if you do have an OFAC hit, you are always required to call OFAC for instructions on how to proceed. And they take you through some questions to make sure that's that it is an actual hit before. But when they do find it, they will tell you what to do, and you may have to block, freeze, return, and etc. I have seen a lot of OFAC hits come back where it requires the credit union to reach out to the member and get additional information. So do know that it happens as well. The link to the OFAC guide is available as well, and you're welcome to download that there. And OFAC covers everything. We know that it covers opening new accounts, wire, ACH transfers, wow, reasons for interdiction software and keeping our membership clean right here, right? Look at all the work we would be doing. Electronic fund transfers, cashing and depositing share drafts on new checks must be OFAC verified for non-members, right? Purchase and dispensing loan proceeds are all subject to OFAC verification. Here are some enforcement actions that OFAC has taken, and you know, just a lot of interesting reading. But want to prepare yourself. The advisories. It's like looking at the $150 million fine for the relationship with Jerry Epstein. Anyway, I think that's kind of funny. Okay, so OFAC, and I can't get my screen to move. I apologize. Give me a minute. There we go. OFAC is actually issuing a very big alert actually to companies that engage with victims, some banks that engage with ransomware attacks. You know, these things, these potential cyber attacks and ransomware attacks are happening, and they ask for payments. So this advisory provides our BSA officers some information on how to deal with those cyber attacks and malicious actors, and what they require you to do. So I would suggest that you go to that advisory on ransomware. I actually included it also as a handout, as an advisory for cyber security and crypto. Let me see what it is here. What was the handout I had? It's on cybersecurity, privately owned ATMs, and cryptocurrency and virtual currency. So they're giving us information on that we should pay attention to. Obviously, not enough time during this class to do that, but please do go in and take a look at that. So some key points on that. You know, again, take a look at this yourself because we just have a few more minutes, but we don't want to get caught in the middle of this ring. So some important numbers from OFAC and FinCEN are listed here. And also really quickly, your BSA filing or your record keeping requirements. You know that everything that we talked about today, everything from CTRs, SARS training, everything for BSA needs to be kept from a federal standpoint for 5 years, right? Everything, supporting documentation, et cetera. In Connecticut, however, that CIP documentation is required to be kept for 7 years after account closure. However, it affords us a little bit more security with those records. So however, get rid of stuff after the 5 years because it becomes a liability if you don't, right? And if you have stuff that you want to keep, but the more you have, the more you're just keeping. The requirement is just the 5 years from a federal standpoint. So I think, Shannon, you're going to get into some CBD and some hemp issues. Was that correct? Or is that still, did I mess things up?
It's up to you.
We
only have about 10 minutes left.
Yeah, so I know that we do have one credit union in Vermont that's working in this field, in this area. It's CBD and hemp and cannabis. I could go through these, but I'd rather know if you have any questions. So instead of trying to get all this here about CBD and cannabis, do you guys have any questions about that and where that is going? Because we are okay with providing services to hemp-related businesses, and I think that that's what we decided here. We pulled up Vermont and we pulled up Connecticut, and we know where we are with licensing and what they're required. So that's all in there, but let me just get to the slide that talks about status. Here we go. In Connecticut, we know recreational cannabis is not legal yet. We only have the medicinal purposes, but people are driving to Massachusetts. So, and hemp, it's legal in the state of Connecticut for us to manufacture and purchase as well as possess. And we're looking at CBD products basically with low THC. Concentrations, right? And so when we talk about CBD really quickly, just make sure that it's from hemp and that it's not from cannabis, because those are two different things. And so hemp is approved. Vermont, I know in 2018, you legalized the possession and cultivation of cannabis for adults 21 and older. And he said he would, this governor, your governor, oh, I got a cat, has indicated that he will let this become law without his signature. So it probably will go into your recreational cannabis will probably go into Vermont probably by 2021 is my guess. And along with Connecticut, because we're not going to lose out on all that tax revenue, right? It's here, and if Connecticut residents can drive to Massachusetts and or New York, I don't know if it's New York or not yet, but if they can, then look at all that we're losing. So we want to make sure that I know that it's going to get approved soon. So do take a look at that in your policies and procedures and decide whether you are doing this or you're not doing this. But make sure that it's clear, it's in your policy, and your staff is well informed. Because if we look at just cannabis, chances are somewhere in these tiers, you may not be doing cannabis related businesses because you're not doing business accounts, but you may be servicing servicing members, existing members that may be working at a dispensary or working at a grower. Make sure that you allow for this language and these conversations between you, your board, and your policy. Make sure that it's all there. Don't not say, oh, I'm not doing it, so blind's eye. You should have known better. It's there. It's going to come through your institution, and you need to be aware of the risks that it may pose. Or maybe it doesn't. It may be already a moot point, right? But it may still require you to look. And so this is the Cole memos that we talk, that we know about, that all of the things that are preventing us or has prevented all of us from jumping into the cannabis space. It's really these issues here. But like I said, a lot of people are already going in, and our credit unions are servicing and providing. I know you guys in Vermont are doing loans to the cannabis industry, aren't you? bit really risky thing. So I hope that that's in your risk assessment somewhere and you are all happy and your examiners are as well. So just, you know, everyone's different. So some emerging fraud and pandemic impacts. FinCEN's issued several warnings and advisories regarding what we're in now, right? And so you can go here and take a look at them all, but Shannon is going to go into some of the things that she's encountered, and she has definitely got some insight into that she wants to provide you. And we have a few more minutes, and then we'll have to say goodbye.
Yeah, so just very quickly, we have noticed a huge uptick in imposter and money mule scams due to COVID-19 criminal activity. So you do need to be aware of these words, right? Imposter scams and money mule schemes. And the reason being is because when you go to file your SARs, they are requesting that that information be input in those SARs, okay? So I'm not going to go through each slide because we are, you know, running out of time, but I do ask if you guys afterwards do take a look at this information, because you want to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, and maybe you don't want to go through the money mule one, but do stop on the slide that you have here about no, go back one, and the criminal activity and how it should be filed on the SAR, and then also maybe the unemployment fraud that we've experienced, that kind of stuff, in the payroll protection program things.
Yeah, so we have, there's a couple different instances that we've seen, whereas they're getting ACH deposits into accounts, right? And they're coming in either different states. You know, you're seeing the deposits coming in from Washington, Arizona, you know, things along those lines. We're also seeing multiple deposits. Okay, so you might be getting a state of Connecticut deposit, but it's coming in multiple deposits on 1 week, right? So if you're applying for unemployment, you should only be getting 1 check, not 7. They're also seeing ACH deposits coming in someone else's name, right? So that's your money mule scheme. Someone is receiving money for someone else. So in this instance, what you're going to want to do is when you file your SAR, and we did provide the links on how to properly file the COVID SARs, you're going to want to make sure that you are filing that note to FinCEN that lets them know that this is a COVID related issue. You're going to want to make sure you put that into section 2. And then in section 34 under fraud, you're going to want to type in that other, what that scheme is, right? Is it a money mule scheme? You know, the type of scheme that's coming into play, and then make sure if it's a money mule scheme and it actually has to do with elder financial exploitation as well, right? The member got a phone call. They said, you know, they need you to get their money for them because they're out of work, and so now this elder member has fallen for that scam. It covers both aspects. So make sure you're being detailed, and you're going to want to make sure that you document this in the narrative section of your document. This is going to be coming up with just the red flags, right? You have a newly opened account that's been inactive, and all of a sudden it starts to receive the direct deposit. You get, like I said, the deposits coming in from someone else's name. For the COVID unemployment insurance fraud, you're going to want to make sure you state that properly in the section 2. Okay, so if it's coming in for the uninsurance, and you want to make sure you put that in there. And again, you're going to be filing that in your narrative section and put it in that fraud section as well. Okay, and these are this is guidance again from FinCEN, so we want to make sure we pull that up and we're filing it the way they want. The Secret Service is asking that if you do notice any ACH deposits coming in that you can stop, to please stop and send those back, and make sure you're following your ACH procedures as far as being able to handle that. If you notice a portion you were able to stop, and you know, unfortunately the member has received a portion of those funds, they're asking that you reach out to your local Secret Service office and you let them know. Okay, you need to document this, because this will come back in your audit examinations. They want to see that you have reached out to the Secret Service office, that you have done your due diligence, and that you are following FinCEN's guidance. And again, all of the
Quickly, Shannon, just really quickly, what happens if the money mule wasn't aware? You know,
If
so
not aware, then you would put in the unwitting money mule. And those key definitions are in here. You would put unwitting and you would enter that into your narrative as well as into that fraud section. Because, you know,
so for example, I know I had a credit union that called, and the only reason that they found this unemployment, an unemployment check from another state was because basically the member called because they knew it was wrong. So they saw the big deposit come into their account and they said, oh, I'm going in to get it really quickly to pull it out. And so that, in a sense, was the red flag that our credit union needed to say, oh, wait a minute, why is this happening? You know, why are they calling about this? And at any rate, it may not even be picked up, but if you have opportunity to find these scams, it just may be as a result of, you know, your member calling in because something else. I mean, that was this specific.
Right, because they can get your banking information from anywhere, right? Just like you know, your regular check fraud and things like that. They have your banking information. So if they have your information and they're depositing and the member's unaware, then the member's unaware. It's okay. You still file that SAR to let the government know, because you know they might not have been involved in that, right?
Right.
So
but I guess what I was saying is that it's very hard to find these ACH transactions.
Yeah.
And the only reason that for this particular credit union that they were able to pick up on it was because the member was stupid enough to say, hey, there was something wrong with my deposit, you know, thinking that it was going to be positive. What it really did was create a red flag for our credit union to take a look at. Wait a minute, you're not even supposed to be receiving that deposit, but that member was trying to get in and pull it out quickly so that, you know, it wouldn't be visible. And what it did was created a red flag. So
right.
And then I have two questions here. One of them is, do you have the contact for the Secret Service other than the general phone number to the local office?
No, unfortunately, that's where you go through. There is a link in here provided for the first COVID unemployment scams that did come out. And in there is an email link to the Secret Service. I recommend using that email link. And it's provided in here.
Thank you. And then
are you scrolling those pages?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going back because I see what the next.
Okay.
And then the next question is wondering if others are seeing members clam up and not willing to provide information regarding unemployment fraud. Emails seem to have disappeared, won't provide name of friends, etc.
Right, so that would fall more under the complicit money mule, and yes, I have seen that in quite a few institutions actually. And you know, so then you would file that SAR appropriately, and if you can't recover the funds, then you reach out to the Secret Service, and then it comes down to your risk, right? The risk of the credit union. Are you going to maintain that member, or are you going to look to not maintain that membership, right? That's going to be a decision that is going to be held within your credit union itself.
Okay. So obviously we're at the end of our hour. There are a few more slides that are left, but they really just have to do with, enforcement actions and statements from our agencies regarding those enforcement actions and lessons learned. So take a look at those. You know, the whole overall thing is that that BSA isn't going anywhere. We're hoping to simplify it, to modernize it, but it's not going anywhere. And the modernization of the BSA basically means that, you know, they're going to try to contact you. They'll work with you. They'll rely on exams or audits so that, you know, they're not duplicating work and they have opportunity to go into other areas versus, you know, so BSA, if you've got a BSA audit and they feel that it's comprehensive, they're going to skip over that and they're going to go somewhere else. So that's what we're getting. And I'm hoping that the information that we provided you today in these short 4 hours has enough for you to feel, gives you enough to feel comfortable in your position and to carry forth your obligations. But the biggest thing that you have to realize is that is the BSA officer, this is you, you know, you've got to make sure that you are aware of all of these things, and you have all your resources, and you've earned your seat at the table, in a sense, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you should be accounted for in every decision that's made for new products and services and changes. There's a compliance risk to everything, and BSA is at the forefront of that. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it'll get more heavy, but hopefully uncomplicated. So with that, I thank you all for attending. And if you do have questions, or if you want to unmute yourselves and have a chat, we can do that. I'm in no hurry to go anywhere. I'm in my office. I'm home. I don't have to drive. And there's no one I have to worry about here except for a cat. So I'm happy to open it up for discussion, and or just end the call, whatever you guys want to do.
Judy, Pat Kelly.
Pat, how are you, Pat?
Just a comment. I've seen, the ACH fraud where either unemployment or retirement benefits are coming into a credit union with a valid account number. ACH only looks at the account number.
Yeah.
But if your data processor can install some other means of looking at the surname, looking at other things other than just the account number, and it might kick out as a posted exception.
Yeah.
But that would be helpful, that it's calling to the staff's attention that there's a problem here.
Really good point. And you may want to check, during this time when we're going to have an influx of certain things. There's going to be another round of stimulus checks. I don't know, whatever the case is. This would be a good time to maybe look at the parameters that you have set within the ACH system, so that certain types of payments, you may want to, issue a parameter: government-related payments get kicked out automatically onto exceptions report, requiring manual review. Just like your IATs right now are kicked out onto exceptions reports, requiring manual review. That might be a way for you to see that activity, because there's a lot that goes in to ACH. You're right, Pat. Thank you. Anyone else? Hi, Joanne.
Oops, I just wanted to remind everyone in Vermont that the certificates will be emailed to you on Friday.
In Connecticut, I know that Emmy has a list of our attendees, and we'll be sending out your certificates as well. With that said, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see you all. It was a pleasure to see you in Vermont, and it's really nice to see all the familiar faces in Connecticut. I see Joanne Todd and Joanne Palladino. I see Pat Kelly, and I've got some other friends on there, and some friends that I've made from Vermont as well. So thank you all for your support. Thank you all for your participation, and for making yourselves available through this new normal, the Zoom, and being happy to see us this way instead of person. So accommodating, we all are, but we appreciate as well. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of the year, and a lovely Thanksgiving, even if it means you're zooming in with your family. But crazy times. I just wish you all the very best, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Judy and Shannon. We appreciate it, and to have everybody, hope everyone has a great Thanksgiving. In Vermont, we can't commingle with our relatives, so we have to eat turkey by ourselves.
That's right. So one other quick question, one other quick mention: if there's something that Shannon and I did not address, please, you have our emails. We have formed a relationship with Vermont so that we can assist you guys with any kind of compliance related. We've got a partnership, and we can assist you with audits and training and all sorts of stuff. But right after this training, if there's something that hasn't been addressed that was pressing, please email us. Shannon and I will be happy to address your questions, or if you want to have more of a private talk as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Stay safe, healthy.